across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Coming up on the programme, riots, of course. We are going to be reflecting on that erupting in Belfast last night as mass protesters targeted migrant homes, set fire to vehicles and businesses following the charging of a Sudanese asylum seeker with attempted murder, with it emerging that he'd been granted refugee status and leave to remain until 2028. What is going on in this country, and how do Brits make their voices heard? Also this afternoon, Kemi Badenoch has called for the police to triple stop and search, warning that political correctness must not stand in the way of saving lives, pledging that a future Conservative government would not bow to race row pressure. Her words, details coming later. And Rachel Reeves has opened the door to yet more tax rises, this time to fund defence spending, as the Chancellor once again signals that hard-working Brits will be the first in line to foot the bill. Yeah, all very well. But are there other ways of raising money, or should I say saving money? I could save you $6 million a day, like that. That's another story. We'll come to all of that. We'll bring you, of course, everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss here today. So this is how it started yesterday afternoon. Have a listen.
We're also aware of calls this evening for protest activity across Northern Ireland and continue to monitor that situation accordingly. I understand that last night's attempted murder will leave people feeling a range of emotions, from fear to anger. Our officers have a role to facilitate and accommodate peaceful protest.
Well, some of those people didn't get the memo, because last night Belfast burned with a fury that was very real, but also with a madness that was impossible to ignore. The anger did not appear from nowhere. The savage attack on an innocent man shocked people, of course, across the city, across the country and across the world. Many look at rising information, failing public services and communities that feel ignored. They see a political class unwilling or unable to answer difficult questions. So let's all agree, the anger is genuine. But there is this void and this gap between anger and action. And that's where a line was crossed. Homes attacked, vehicles set alight, families absolutely terrified, children crying at the thought they're going to be set on fire. Whatever grievance people had or thought they were expressing disappeared into smoke. The moment a mob decides to punish strangers for the actions of an individual, it stops being a protest and, of course, becomes criminality. I'll come back to that in a moment. Many of those caught on camera will end up in court. We know 3 arrests already, some in prison. In fact, I would say anyone caught last night is definitely going to jail for a very long time. Such is the stupidity. They will have sacrificed their futures for a few hours of destructions. Now, the deeper question is motive. Was this really about justice or about rage looking for a target in a country that increasingly feels rudderless? We have institutions drained away, politicians detached from public frustration. Some people have chosen chaos over solutions. So protesters set fire to homes, a Middle Eastern supermarket on fire, several vehicles, a bus, a police car, after ignoring calls for calm. Here's the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Hilary Benn.
Nothing can justify the violence that we saw on the streets of Northern Ireland last night, with masked thugs trying to burn and intimidate people out of their homes.
Well, footage of the disorder shows, as I mentioned, infants being carried out of neighbouring houses as flames engulfed their properties. A local pastor said that people were being forced out of their homes because of the colour of their skin. And chaos, of course, solves nothing. It's left streets burned, frightened neighbours, society even more divided than it was. If your message was meant to be heard, then you'd kind of drown it out yourself. The cameras will focus on the arrest, the prison sentence and the burning streets, not the grievances that brought people there. But we can change that in the way we debate these things. So let's conclude in that case with Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, speaking in the last half an hour at PMQs.
We all condemn, of course, the appalling violence in Belfast last night after the horrific attack on Monday. But this Prime Minister is in denial of the rising despair across the country over his failure to stop the boats and related criminality.
Now, I find it really difficult to disagree with Richard Tice's point there. Look, those that engage in violence, I'm not sure these are the best examples, should I say, of individuals who are philosophically driven by the details of cases and the issues around whether it's immigration, whether it's about employment, whether it's something else. These aren't people that I would necessarily suggest are the best in having a keen eye on events. These are people that like to kick off. Let's be honest, most people who feel just as angry didn't set fire to anything. But it's true to ask, how do Brits make their voices heard? Reasonable question. 0344 499 1000. Chloe Dobbs is with us, political commentator, to talk about this and the other big stories of the day. We knew this was going to happen, Chloe. There was no, almost you could have written it beforehand. We talked about it yesterday. How we divide or identify who's responsible. As I said at the end there, there's a lot of anger. Most people would never think of setting fire to a supermarket or a bus or someone's house while they're in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely shocking, the scenes that we have seen, and it's really frustrating for those of us who want to, off the back of events like this, have an adult conversation about immigration, about border control, perhaps about what do we do to make sure that there are more checks without, undermining the Good Friday Agreement, for example. But this just mars our ability to have that proper conversation, because what happens is when events like this happen is you end up with this perception from people who disagree with the perception that there's something wrong with open borders. They come to this conclusion that, oh, everyone who's concerned about immigration is a thug, is EDL, is someone who goes around with a mask on and sets buses on fire. And that just tars the image of all of us who are wanting to have proper conversations about this. All the people who, I'm sure there were plenty of them, who went out yesterday wanting to peacefully protest. And that is the really disappointing thing about this turn of events.
Indeed, and it's graphic to see. It won't solve anything. It sort of kind of feeds into the lap of people like Keir Starmer on this one, because it allows him to sort of take over the narrative and only talk about, thuggery, his kind of words, right-wing thuggery, even more his kind of words. We all agree it doesn't solve anything. We all understand that it's not a clever thing to do. And I would remind, by the way, anybody who's ever thinking of getting involved in this kind of thing, if nothing else, there's always a good chance that you're caught because someone knows someone, even if you've got a mask on and a balaclava. I mean, the sentences are pretty brutal when it comes to public order in this environment. We saw it after Southport. We've seen it now after Southampton. 6 men involved in violent protests being sentenced at the Crown Court today. 2 others have just been sentenced. We've got Daniel Frost, 44-year-old, been jailed for 2 years and 4 months. Rhys Robinson, 21, jailed for 2 years, both admitting violent disorder. Violent disorder is a really serious offence, and when it happens in the context of a potential riot, almost, if you speak to a Home Secretary off the what's the word? Not off the cuff, off the record. Off the record, and say, what is the worst thing that could happen to a Home Secretary? They will say a riot. It's almost worse than it, because it's hard to... So the state comes down really hard on people, whether it was 2011, whether it was the last couple of years, or whether it's Southampton, and the same's going to happen with Belfast.
Exactly. I mean, these things can snowball so quickly. Of course, we saw with the riots that we saw after the Southport attack, that snowballed very quickly. And we did have this strong response from the government saying, oh, we're going to have 24-hour courts and whatnot. Much to our frustration, a lot of the people they went after were people who had actually just tweeted things, for example, rather than people who had actually done any kind of horrendous
it's worth
rioting.
Saying, actually, by the way, if you've tweeted something, even Lucy Connolly, who tweeted the most egregious, awful thing, and maybe she's as thick as mince, I don't know. But the fact is, you shouldn't be sending. We shouldn't be sending people to jail for nearly 3 years.
That's the thing, and I remember it being really chilling when, amidst those riots, we had the CPS put out a video warning us all that if you merely retweeted footage from a riot, that you might be charged for that because that is, very indirectly inciting violence. And I tell you what, I was thinking twice last night when I was looking at the clips of the bus on fire on Twitter last night. I was about to retweet it, and I thought, am I going to get in trouble for this? But anyway, the people who actually set things on fire as opposed to tweet, I think they do deserve the full force of law, because if you don't do that and there is no accountability, then this will spiral, and we could potentially see this lead to a summer of protests, and clearly this is really putting people's lives in danger. Not just police officers having bricks thrown at them, as we often see. We've had families and babies having to evacuate their homes. We've got scenes that look like they're from a war zone. I mean, ironically, we had some Ukrainian refugees have to evacuate the house that they were in. They've had to evacuate Ukraine, and then they've come here, and it's almost turned into a war zone on the streets, which is crazy.
I mean, it is crazy, but there is the reasonable question: how do Brits make their voices heard? Now, you don't have to have read much about the history of protest in this country to know that. And this isn't, I'm not saying this in an advisory capacity, but quite a lot of very significant laws have been changed. The obvious one is women getting the vote, and also men getting the vote as well. But women getting the vote, suffragettes and the like, that didn't happen without some people kicking off. Now, that doesn't defend the poll tax.
Some people argue against that, actually. Some people say it was on the women's vote was actually held back by the crazy protests, and it was on its way from
the King's horse and all that stuff.
The suffragists, the ones that were the reasonable ones, were doing
Whereas the suffragettes were,
they were doing it the correct way.
Well, I suppose that depends whose version you want to believe.
The reality is, whenever we see change, it's always very hard to ascertain exactly what was the cause. I mean, there are normally multiple factors, and protests may come into it. I mean, Just Stop Oil, for example, they announced that they were going to stop protesting because they were the ones who were solely responsible for getting Ed Miliband to stop the exploration in the North Sea. And I thought, I'm not sure that was entirely just up to you, Just Stop Oil.
I'm not sure that is. But the fascination of this. For those of us who have very strong views on the lack of action from our government, and we will get lots of calls on this, and we'll get lots of messages. And yesterday I was talking about Twitter because I find it a fairly inauthentic news. It can be, I've said it forever, I don't want to ban Twitter, and it can be your best friend. And when a news story breaks, it's the best place ever for 2 minutes. After that 2 minutes, it's game over. Everyone will pile in. You'll have names, photographs, pictures, all manner of things. It will go chaotic. So it's got good and bad stuff about it. But what I'm aware of is that you and I, who have broadly the same opinion on these kind of things, lots of our listeners will, there's a whole raft of other people that we forget about. And I know it's very convenient and, frankly, good for your health to forget about the left-wing voice. But they're also massive, aren't they? Who don't think any of this stuff. They don't have this view. So when they try to ascertain, is the country more left-wing? Is it more right-wing? Who was it we had? Was it Rafe, I think, recently, who we had on the programme, who said, actually, we are mostly, as a country, more left than right. Now, that horrifies me, because I'd like to think we're like 98% right. When I say right-wing, I'm talking about centre-right, as in right, as in correct, not extreme right, not in any kind of nefarious way. But my point is, for everything we're saying here, the government have got to start to listen. How do Brits make their voice heard? There's another 50% of this population going, I don't recognise any of this discussion. I mean,
I think courage is really
important. Who are these people?
I think courage is really important. So for a long time we've had that saying, the the silent Tory. I mean, those people may be silent reformers rather than silent Tories now, but people on the right are generally more scared to make their voice heard, and so people on the left have this perception that they are the majority when in fact they are not. I mean, you would have people on the left saying anyone who's a Tory, they're Tory scum, and there's a saying, I'd never kiss a Tory, and all these things, as if it's some kind of fringe view. Whilst the Tories were in power, they were in power for 14 years, there were clearly plenty of people voting for the Conservative Party. They just weren't voicing themselves publicly. Yeah. And I do think that people have started to find that courage. We have seen more people going, I mean, for example, the Unite the Kingdom rallies, think of them what you will. The fact that so many people turned up to those shows that more people are finding their courage to have their voice heard. But we are in a very privileged position in that for our jobs we can voice our opinions. But I get so many messages from people who say, oh, I'd love to say what you say, but I know I'll lose my job. And so I think there is a problem with employers as well, because you can walk around your workplace with a Free Palestine badge on your T-shirt all day and no one's going to stop you. But announce that you support the Reform Party and suddenly you could be out the door.
Well, here's the funny thing, isn't it? That I mean, just to bring it back to, it's extraordinary, and that could, even, I mean, it's Reform, for goodness sake, it's not exactly an extreme party. It's Reform.
But a lot of people do think it's extreme.
I know, and it's
which
bizarre.
Is bad.
And there's a couple of videos out there, aren't there, of somebody in a Wetherspoons who refused to serve some people because they were
the kid that looked about 12.
Yeah, but some 12-year-old that shouldn't be, frankly, old enough to sell a bag of peanuts, let alone a beer. Nonetheless, it's extraordinary. You've got these people lose their minds. Reform have massively condemned those riots last night. Let's get this out there first of all. Nearly everybody has condemned those riots last night, all right? It's not just me or Julia or Jezza or Richard Tice. Most people of all political persuasions will go, right, that was bad. But I am going to ask the question, because I'm not surprised by those riots. I'm not surprised it happened. But simultaneously, we can be disgusted by the fact that, young children were rushed out of their own homes because they were on fire, for goodness sake. How do Brits make their voices heard?
Well, I think it's... as I said, you've got that kind of safety in numbers, and you've got to be willing to post on social media and tell people what you think, for example. But it's not just that. It's actually, when you're in a group of people and someone says, oh, Nigel Farage is a villain, right? And you feel a bit, and you can see they've got a lot of anger. I'll be in situations like that, especially a group of friends you don't want to fall out with, where maybe they don't know your political views, and you want to be small and you want to not say anything because you don't want to cause any tension, but actually you do need to step in and give these people a reality check and say, look, I actually think differently, and there are huge swathes of people that think differently, and get these people out of their bubble. And it is so important that we talk to them. I think there are so many people who think, even if they're willing to post online, be these, say, keyboard warriors at home, is that in their day-to-day lives, when they're talking to people face-to-face, they are so terrified of any confrontation that people just do not discuss politics anymore. And what that means is we've lost that tolerance and that ability to have a discussion. I mean, Charlie Kirk, who of course very sadly lost his life because of people that disagree with him, he always said bad things happen when people stop talking.
Correct.
Marriages end in divorce when married couples stop talking. When there are problems and there are disagreements, the way you solve them is to talk to each other.
Always
and then you'll normally realise that you've actually got a lot more common ground than you think. But we've completely lost that now. People don't want to speak to anyone that they disagree with.
Chloe, we'll come back to more from Chloe Dobbs in a second. A little bit of breaking news. Afghan national Mohammed Tajik and Sudanese national Al-Noor Ali have been jailed at Canterbury Crown Court for 2 years and 27 months, respectively, for becoming the first people to be sentenced for a new offence of endangering others during a channel crossing. Now, that's interesting, not the channel crossing itself, endangering others during the channel crossing. So it is a new offence. They're now in the chiller and we will be paying for their incarceration. There's an irony there. 0344 499 1000. How do Brits make their voices heard? This is Talk.
Varda Kalakane was a 32-year-old black man. He murdered 3 white people. Not once in any part of the conversation or reporting was there any racial profiling or even the question raised.
I don't want to drag this boy onto the issues, not onto Henry, and that is something that the family have asked for.
35 years I've been doing this. I've never seen a moment when most of mainstream media and most of mainstream politics was more out of touch with the country than over this issue. Quite extraordinary.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This comes in from Pumpkin, who says, normal working class people in this country have had enough. The upper classes are not listening. Violence is the only answer to these people. But you know what? I don't even know if it's upper classes. I don't even think it is upper classes. I think the upper classes would, if that is the way to know, are you talking about the royal family or aristocrats in that respect?
It's not really a word we typically use
I think we could
anymore.
talk about maybe the political class, as in government political classes. Westminster are not listening, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for
Everyone's
sure.
scared witless to say anything.
But I think that there are. I would say that there are parties such as the Reform Party that are listening, that aren't stuck in that mindset, the Westminster bubble.
Sure.
But people have this frustration because they've got this waiting game. Although Reform is doing very well in the polls, it's not like they can put Farage into number 10 tomorrow. And even though they've got that new party that's listening to them, they still feel like they're being ignored, and especially given that Starmer has hung on for so long as a Prime Minister, despite him being, a dead man walking for about the past year.
True. This comes from Mark in Selby. Ian, what gets right up my nose is when leaders call for calm and follow that up with threats of the full force of the law should people not do as they say. What leaders fail to grasp or even acknowledge is that they have failed to heed to our calls to stop illegal immigration, so why heed them? More nights of trouble will follow and indeed spread unless or until the debate is had and action is promised. What is hard to understand about that? Don't expect any... Mark, you're 100%, but don't expect any results from this government and Keir Starmer. Will we get it from elsewhere? Will we get it from the Conservatives? They're also in the news. Kemi Badenoch taking the... I nearly said taking the knee then. You'll never see her take the knee. Taking on the race route around stop and search head on. She's pledging to triple its use and telling the police to ignore the controversy if it means saving lives. Let's have a listen to the Conservative leader speaking yesterday.
The reason why we want to triple stop and search and hire 10,000 more police officers is because we believe that this will lead to safer streets. I'm afraid it doesn't matter if more black boys are searched because it will mean more black lives are saved.
This is one of those statements, of course, that people will lose their mind over. It's only made marginally better for some that it's a black woman making the point. For others, that actually makes it slightly worse that it's a black woman making these points. Shouldn't be that. She's the leader of the Conservative Party. Stop and search. It's been controversial. I think it's been made controversial by quite a lot of agitators who just don't like the idea of it. Is she on a hiding to nothing on this, though?
Look, I think she's got a completely valid point. Knife crime, it feels like it's out of control. I know Sadiq Khan will play with the figures and tell us, oh no, knife crime's coming down, no knives in London, it's just all made up. But I think that people in reality who recognise the fact that, it depends where you start the date from on the figures that you measure from, and also the fact that you have a lot of crimes not being reported to the police these days because people don't expect the police to turn up. It feels like the streets are becoming less safe and something needs to be done. And I mean, it's the perfect example that just illustrates that woke kills. It's supposed to be this lovely thing about, oh, let's just be kind to everyone, let's be kind to everybody of every colour, when actually, if you don't tell hard truths and you don't do difficult things, you end up with pretty sinister consequences. And in this case, it is people losing their lives because of people having knives on the street. And it's not like knife crime is a really difficult thing to solve. It's actually very straightforward. You just need more stop and search, and you actually need consequences when people are found with knives. What we find is that when the police find people with knives on them, it's not the case that you're straight away going to be put behind bars. You're often just given a bit of a slap on the wrist and told, oh, don't bring it out again. which is ludicrous to me. So it seems a very obvious point. And also, if you see, Sean Bailey is great on this, in that he says he's got friends in the black community who are absolutely begging for more stop and search, and that his nephew is little nephew is absolutely terrified to leave the house because he's terrified of being stabbed by another black boy in one of these gangs. So it's not just the case that it's just white people who are saying, "Oh, you need to stop and search."
No, that's absolutely true.
The black community, if they are more likely to carry a knife, well then fine. If it ends up being the case that we end up, and we had the Met Police, I think they've done it now. We're getting rid of the data on their gangs matrix because they thought that it was racist, the data that they were holding, because it had something like 80% of the gang members that they had on that list were black.
This is how we got into the problem with Southport, with Nottingham, with Southampton, with all of these. I know the Southampton thing is still yet to be fully established as to what happened, but our suspicions are reasonable on exactly. But the others, we've seen this, and for some reason, parts of the police are resisting the complete obvious here. I do find it interesting, however, that those, and we're going to speak to Ken Hines, who kind of talks a lot about this stuff. He will be very grumpy about this, I can tell you, a little later in the programme. But those guys have been arguing two-tier policing forever, against them. And they will say the stop and search stats reveal that two-tier policing is there. The police will still stop more black kids than white kids.
I mean, it makes sense that they stop more black kids than white kids.
Well, there's 6% of black kids in London, and nearly 14% of offences or knife-related issues are connected to young black kids. So it's 2.5 times the chance of it being a white kid on that particular offence. There'll be other offences. If you're looking for a football hooligan, stop a white kid. If you're looking in terms of knife crime, there's more chance it's a black kid. That's what those stats are suggesting.
The reality is that in different communities, you will have different socioeconomic backgrounds, you will have different problems. As you say, football hooliganism may be more, and drunken disorderly behaviour may be more of a problem in white working class communities, and the reality is that knife crime is more of an issue in black communities. Now, you may want to drill down and try and figure out why that is the case. I'm sure it's not just because you're born with that colour of skin and suddenly you go, oh, I must pick up a knife. It will be an environmental reason why this is the case. It's not racist to point that out. And my personal experience living in London is that when I see these groups of gangsters going around, trying to get people's phones, bulges in their pockets that look like they may be knives, I would say the vast majority of the time I see that, it is boys from the black community. And that's not racism, that's just the reality in front of me.
Let's we haven't got long, but very briefly, let's just talk about this. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has warning parents against coddling, not a phrase people use in everyday life, coddling their kids, because it shields them from the real world. She said kids should take the bus to school, go on bike rides with friends. As she warned, they were becoming less likely to taking risks. She refused to let a generation be written off, but said it would not be achieved by promising young people a world without hardship. That's part of it, isn't it?
I actually completely agree with Labour for once. Well done, Bridget Phillipson. Now, will this actually happen in reality? More responsibility needs to be put on parents as opposed to the state to fix the problems with children. I mean, when I was a youngster, we just, from a very young age, we learnt to look after ourselves. And I understand it was safer. You could just run around the village, go knock on your friends' doors and whatnot. But we took risks which were important for the development of our brains, the development of our maturity. Whereas now, I live with an 8-year-old girl now, and I find it so strange. I'm like, she's not even able to be left alone in the house for 10 minutes. She would cry. Whereas me at that age, I mean, we would be home. Some parents would disagree, but we would take care of ourselves. We would entertain ourselves at that age, perfectly capable.
Sure.
We'd go on public transport, and it so rapidly declines the maturity of children, where it seems like 10-year-olds are like toddlers these days.
And there's the problem, isn't it? Yeah, get out on your bikes, climb some trees, do stuff. I mean, don't go backpacking around the world at 11. No one's asking for that. But
and you have these parents go, oh, but what if they get kidnapped if they go out on their bikes with their friends by themselves? Well, I'm sorry, but that's a risk of life. I could get kidnapped when I go outside by myself.
Do you know what? Here's
as
a
an
reassuring.
adult.
This certainly used to be the stat up until a couple of years ago. The stat for a stranger kidnapping a child from the street has never increased ever since statistics began. It's just there's the chance that there's always going to be a random nut job, but it's never got. It's not got worse. We just perceive
You're
it's
probably more likely as a female adult to be abducted than a small child, right?
Sure.
A sexual predator of some type, right?
True.
Why would some the number of people that would want to kidnap a 5-year-old is
it's very
small.
tiny. Thank goodness. Chloe, thank you. See you soon. Chloe Dobbs with us here on Talk. Over to you. 0344 499 1000. Back to what happened in Belfast last night. How do Brits make their voices heard? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Paul in Fife says, Ian, violent protests are unwanted and rightly condemned. However, I don't recall condemnation of violent protests across the Middle East some years ago when we had the Arab Spring. They were applauded by the West because we viewed the regimes in those countries as hostile, despotic and against the people. How much difference are we now seeing how much different are we now in the UK? We've got a government which refuses to listen to the British people, says Paul. In fact, it's a great point. I'd bring it even closer to home in some respects. 2011, when the riots started initially across London. This was, I think, gosh, there have been so many strange stories of different levels of government issues and policing and goodness knows what. I think it was the Mark Duggan case that started it off. Long after the Duggan case had happened, but nonetheless, that's what started it. And there were many people on the left saying, this is what happens when you don't listen to the people. So, yeah, people do change their tune depending on who they are. We'll talk to James Bryson, editor of Unionist Voice, in a moment on what happened yesterday. Homes, businesses, police cars set ablaze in Belfast, rioting breaking out. This, of course, followed the charging of a Sudanese asylum seeker over that sickening knife attack. The violence has been widely condemned, but it comes as communities across the city demand answers about who is being housed in their neighbourhoods. Not unreasonable. Adam James Pollock is a journalist and commentator based in Northern Ireland. Adam, good afternoon to you. It was pretty grim. We hope there's no more tonight. We know that some people have been arrested. I'm assuming, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would take a punt that nothing surprised you about this happening yesterday. We could have almost written it.
Yeah, I was on the street yesterday as this was all unfolding. And before it, same day, I wrote an article basically predicting that this is likely to happen because, as your previous guest mentioned, there has been a long time where politicians in this country have generally ignored concerns about immigration that have come from people. And the solution, I don't think anyone reasonable is saying the solution is going and burning people out of their houses, but it is the inevitable consequence of a government that doesn't take these concerns seriously and in some cases actively criticises the concerns.
It would be said, of course, that most people, or it should be said, I think we're all on the same page on this, most people, even those that would be, part of what you would call the harder right wing, of politics would still condemn this. So are those that engage in this, or do you sense that those engage, are they sort of philosophically linked to the subject, or are they just people who like to kick off on a normal Friday night, and here they are feeling they've got a free pass to do just that on a Tuesday night?
It's hard to figure out what the real concerns are, because nobody really wanted to be speaking to the media yesterday. I witnessed other journalists, ones who are, more obvious with big cameras coming across from the mainland on the streets, and they were actively told, go away, you're not wanted here, we don't want to be on camera. Now, of course, they will be on camera. What they're doing is a public act. There's lots of documented footage of it. But the grievances these people have, from what I could gather, is generally against mass immigration itself. And the attempted beheading that we saw on Monday evening was just the catalyst for this wider riot to kick off.
Yeah, and it is, sadly, shocking events. Southport would be an obvious example that often lead into a wider debate. I appreciate that in Southport, when people were throwing bricks at police officers' heads, that was not in any way conducive with trying to solve the issues or the wider issues around immigration. But for the good or the bad, rightly or wrongly, it did spawn a wider debate about immigration, and that's kind of where we're at with a story such as this.
Yeah, and I think it is worth mentioning that both those who were out rioting and the police yesterday seem to have learned this lesson, that these kind of attacks against each other are not conducive to any real change happening. Yesterday, all I witnessed from the police was they pushed protesters off the main kind of West Link, which links 3 motorways in Belfast together. They pushed them off that and back into their own residential areas, where we sadly saw houses and cars being burnt. But the police then stayed back because they realised there's not going to be any use in going full throttle against these people, inciting them to then riot against the police, because we've learned before that doesn't help. It just leads to more people getting involved in the violence, more people getting injured.
Yeah.
And I don't think the rioters themselves wanted to do that yesterday. At least there's no sign that I can see.
And it would be fair to say, of all parts of the country where the police have some experience in this kind of area, it is the guys over there in Belfast.
Yeah, I mean, rioting, as everyone will know, it's something that there's been a sad, long history of in Northern Ireland.
Adam, great to have you on. Thank you. We will speak again, I'm sure. Adam James Pollock, journalist and commentator. He's based in that neck of the woods. James Bryson is the editor of Unionist Voice. Afternoon to you, James. Nice to have you with us. Just give us your overview then on what we were seeing last night and how much of it you understand as to what happened.
Well, I think obviously all of this goes back to the fundamental concerns that many people have in respect of immigration and the impacts that that has had on particularly working class communities. And I think there's been this growing anger that people who are seen as the political elites, people who live in leafy suburbs, aren't experiencing the impacts of the policies which they advocate for. Nobody's being beheaded in the middle class communities. They're not suffering from all of this. So I think that's the underlying context in respect of it. What then happened in North Belfast seems to have sparked that anger. There was many peaceful protests last night, thousands of, I started off myself in Bangor, County Down, and there was well over 1,000 people. There was children, women, elderly people. It was a very good-natured protest, but making an important point. Some other parts of the country, frustrations then boiled over, and we seen scenes that look, we don't want to see. Nobody should be getting burnt out of their homes.
Sure.
But I mean, and then there was the danger that, as I say, nobody should be getting burned out of their homes. But people thought they were burning out what they saw as illegal immigrants, and they ended up burning out members of their own community and endangering their lives. And the police simply couldn't. I mean, I was in touch with the police last night. The police simply could not cope with this. And what we had is that these scenes were ongoing in various places, and the police were just completely overrun. They were just unable to deal with this in any shape or form. And this is as bad as I've seen it, I have to say, in my adult life. And I mean, I was around at the forefront maybe during the time of the Union flag protest, which was an extraordinary period for this type of thing, but I never seen anything like I seen last night.
Are there expectations that something similar could happen again? Because whilst there have been arrests and also in a kind of moment of synergy in terms of what was happening in Southampton, currently we've got people getting jailed as we speak, fairly lengthy prison sentences for crimes that would be seen as slightly less than some of what we saw in Belfast last night. Well, you know, I think I'm right in saying public transport stops at around about 5:30 today because of the potential. Is there any intel, Jamie, any word on the street as to whether there might be a revisit tonight of what happened last night?
Well, look, I think one of the problems, and this is a very interesting and difficult, complex part of this, is that up until the last number of years, you had, paramilitary organisations exercising significant control in these communities. There's now a process ongoing of transition, and those groups essentially moving away from, and they're being asked by the government and by the state to move away from exercising any coercive control over their communities. I think the police would confirm in most of these areas it's not, in fact, loyalist or the paramilitary organisations orchestrating this. It seems to be quite organic. So in years gone by, the organisations could have turned this on or turned it off as and when they wanted, but they're not controlling this. Sure. They're involved in a transition process, so on what basis would they start to exert control now? Yep. So it's a very unpredictable situation, the likes of which we haven't seen before in Northern Ireland, because, as I say, there was always the control of the organisations who could stop this or start this as and when they wanted. Now the organisations, I think, are taking the approach of saying, look, we're transitioning. You can't expect us to do the job of the police. It's over to the police, and the police were shown last night, entirely incapable of dealing with this. So I would be concerned that this is not only going to reoccur, but in fact escalate, because you have a lot of angry young people who feel not listened to. And look, nobody wants to see the scenes we had last night, but let me say this: everybody coming on condemning and piously, sanctimoniously preaching is not going to make a blind bit of difference to these angry young people. So they need to start listening and going to the actual deal with the policy issues which is causing this and find a solution to it. And that's not to encourage or condone any of this activity, which, nobody wants to see this. But, they need to deal with the core policy issues which have given rise to this.
Well, I was going to say, Jamie, just a final point, and on the point that you just made there, do politicians listen? I mean, one of the problems we have, again, Southampton, Southport, Belfast, these areas where these pinch points and these flare-ups happen, what it does do, it sort of hands a kind of an open goal to people like Keir Starmer, who simply say, no, you see, these are just far-right nutters, they're out there, they're kicking off, we will not tolerate this. And then that sort of overshadows the real deal and what's happening and what's underneath it. So does anything ever change?
Yeah, and as I said, the point I started this contribution with was that a lot of the anger that's coming on people in working class communities is these people, Keir Starmer and the likes of him, who are preaching sanctimoniously at everybody. There's no immigrant hotels living next door to Keir Starmer or his social circle or people in his of his social class. Nobody's being beheaded in middle class suburbs. This is happening in working class communities, and these are communities. And look, whatever way you say about it, traditions, culture, social cohesion is built up over decades. Families live in communities, and people across the United Kingdom are seeing their communities changing in a way which they never voted for, they were never asked about, and this is being imposed upon them, and people are now starting to kick back. That's not to encourage that, that's not to condone that, but that is simply to provide a context and understanding as to why people are feeling so angry that if nothing else to do, bar, lash out. And we want to stop that. We want to find a solution for that, but people got to listen.
Jamie, brilliant contribution. Thank you, sir, for your time. We will speak again. Jamie Bryson, editor of Unionist Voice. A couple of people making this point. Andrew says, Braverman and Jenrick must be held responsible for the decisions they made as ministers. Britain is now paying the price. Both of those politicians, of course, are now Reform UK members. Suella Braverman, still a member of Parliament too. She was Home Secretary when this man, we can't say too much about it because there's now an ongoing, very live case, but she was Home Secretary at the point that this man was allowed to have 5-year right to remain in Northern Ireland from Ireland. And Robert Jenrick was the immigration minister. Now, both of those people, I'm not defending bad decisions, were probably never aware of the specific case of one person. And both of them, when they resigned from the government, made the point that they tried to make substantial changes and were stopped at every step. I think that more or less clarifies their position. There's more detail to it than that, but you take the point. Daniel's in Epsom. Dan, what have you got for us afternoon?
How you doing, Ian?
I'm all right, thanks.
I think obviously this incident was atrocious, but I think what we're seeing though before our eyes is the realisation that we don't live in a democracy. I think that most of us now, the British majority, are looking around. We can see the decline and degradation that third world immigration is bringing to our country.
Yeah.
And I think for 6 or 7 general elections, we voted against it. We specifically asked for legal immigration to be very selective, low numbers. We don't want any illegal immigration at all. We want mass deportations of people that shouldn't be here. Government after government said, yes, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll get tough. And none of them have done it. And I think we're seeing like a democratic breakdown before our eyes. And I think that's why people... Do you know what? I think that... What do you do? If you've had 25 years of telling successive governments what you want them to do, bearing in mind they work for us and they don't do it, rioting is justified. Sometimes you have to smash things up, and sometimes you have to make them listen, because for 25 or 30 years, Ian, they haven't been listening. They've been ignoring the will of the British majority. And I think they're going to rue that day.
Do you hope, I know you hope, but do you genuinely think anything is going to change? If I was trying to imagine, Daniel, a reform government, Nigel Farage as Prime Minister, and what he would be saying right today in Parliament, and I can only imagine that it would sound a bit like what Keir Starmer has said today on the same issue.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. So for 25 years, we've had governments talking tough.
Yeah.
We're going to smash the gangs. We're going to stop the boats. None of them have done it. And meanwhile, the people can see the decline around us in our society. Girls are getting sexually harassed, raped, stabbed with screwdrivers, murdered, people getting decapitated. And the Labour government, there's nothing to see here, but we know that there is. They're peeing on our shoes and telling us it's raining, and the British majority will not put up with it anymore, and they don't seem to comprehend. I hope that Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage can put their differences to one side, okay, and put the electorate, put the British majority first, okay, and we can have a reform-led government who are actually willing to do the bidding of the British majority. That is my one wish. I've got children. I have a stake in the future. I can see... I moved out of London because I didn't want to live there. I didn't like what it was turning into. And where I've moved to is, over the 10 years I've been there, is now getting worse. Something urgent needs to be done. And I think the only party, I just hope that Nigel gets in and he's decisive and he does things, because I think it's our last chance to save Britain, Ian. I really do.
It's a profound point to finish on, Dan. Thank you, mate. Daniel in Epsom. Thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000. That gives you... Daniel is very measured, and I think most people, like myself, who have very passionate views on all of this stuff, you tend to... In some respects, you tend to gain... You get a bigger audience when you speak like Daniel than you do by setting fire to a Middle Eastern supermarket. I think that's fair. 0344 499 1000. But how do Brits make their voices heard? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Valdo Canacane was a 32-year-old black man. He murdered 3 white people. Not once in any part of the conversation or reporting was there any racial profiling or even the question raised.
I don't want to drag this boy onto the issues, not onto Henry, and that is something that the family have asked for.
35 years I've been doing this. I've never seen a moment when most of mainstream media and most of mainstream politics was more out of touch with the country than over this issue. Quite extraordinary.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So the police in Northern Ireland have said the beheading, near beheading, is not terrorist related. Does this mean that given this animal has not done this for ideological reasons, then this is even worse? Fight and then tries to cut a head off for no reason. Disgusting. Obviously, we can't get into too much detail because there will be a court case. Somebody's now been charged, and the court case will establish, one would assume, certainly hope, all of the above. It's really tricky now to the terrorist thing. Any nut job has sort of become a lone terrorist, of whoever they happen to be. But of course, terrorism in the conventional sense and the usual conventional legal description would ordinarily suggest you are affiliated to an organisation, political, religious, sometimes both, or of that nature. That's how we know it. But I think the definition is now kind of widening somewhat, because individuals who carry out atrocious acts, and Rudy Cabana will be a sort of an obvious example, although, I don't think anyone has any trouble understanding that this was an absolutely mad, pathological, psychopathic teenager with God knows how many issues. That doesn't excuse anything, by the way. Had a complete addiction and was mesmerised by violence of all natures. So I get it. Brad says, Collins, I think I speak for the majority. We voted Brexit mainly to take control of our borders, says Brady. Yeah, and we've increased immigration since Brexit from outside of the EU. It's kind of interesting that that has happened. Let's go to Chris, who's in Bournemouth on this issue. How do Brits make their voices heard and associated discussions? Chris, what have you got for us? Hello.
Right, Ian.
Yeah.
Where I don't support the violence that happened in Southampton and Northern Ireland last night, I do support peaceful protest.
Yeah.
But there is only one person to blame for this, and that is Keir Starmer, for his open border policies, letting anybody come in. And if you have an issue with these people, and then the human rights lawyers come in and they turn around and say, you can't do that, these people have got human rights. What about my human rights? What about the rights and the human rights of the people of this country that pay their taxes?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And day out.
Do you blame, though, do you also blame, Chris, because bearing in mind, this started way before Keir Starmer was even an MP, let alone Prime Minister. You can go back to 2016, Sajid Javid, all the various Home Secretaries. You can look at the Johnson, Truss, Rishi Sunak governments, all oversaw tens and tens of thousands of young men coming across the Channel.
I do blame successive governments.
It hasn't got it hasn't got significantly worse under Keir Starmer. It's just carried on.
Yeah, but the immigration and the amount of people that are coming into this country, and he's getting more and more and more.
No, I agree, and you're absolutely right. It's his responsibility now because he is the Prime Minister. My point was just that this has gone on for years, and they've all ignored it. They've all said, "Oh, don't worry, we're onto it." And they've ignored it. And Starmer is doing exactly the same thing again.
And as soon as you turn around and say the only solution to this is to close our borders and not let them in, then the politicians and whatnot say, you can't do that. I mean, Donald Trump had it right when he came across here. The immigration into this country is destroying it, and we should be doing something about it. And Keir Starmer needs to listen to the people of this country and do what they ask. Close our borders. Don't let these people in. And then starting from top to bottom, with the army involved as well, is to go right through the country. And if they can find these people that have come into this country, is to round them up, put them in barracks or put them in prison or whatever, and secure compounds, and then say from there on, you either apply for immigration here, or we send you back to your country and you apply for it over there. It's the only solution, Ian. We've got to get rid of these people.
There are lots of people suggesting something of that nature. If you were deporting all of those people, one of the estimates that I heard, and this sounds outrageous, Chris, to get rid of all illegals and those that shouldn't be here, foreign nationals aren't working, goodness knows what, the whole list, would take around about 35 to 40 years. What are your thoughts on that?
I can't believe that, Ian. I really can't.
Well, that would include. That would be suggesting that you would have to get everybody onto an aeroplane to fly them back to their country of origin. So you'd have to establish who all those people were. They would have lawyers, because they're allowed to have lawyers, and then you'd get into that situation, which is kind of where we've been anyway, and then trying to get flights to take off. Where do they land? Can you fly to somewhere that doesn't want you to land? You'd end up in all of that. These are hypotheticals, but the broader point, you're absolutely bang on, Chris. Nobody has done anything. It's not like they've done something. They've done nothing. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. We'll take some more calls in just a couple of moments after the news at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Yeah, welcome back. Homer Content. We are, of course, responding to those riots erupting in Belfast last night. Masked protesters targeting migrant homes, setting fire to vehicles and businesses following the charging of a Sudanese asylum seeker with attempted murder, with it emerging that he'd been granted refugee status and leave to remain until 2028. You sort of wonder on what basis. This is somebody, by the way, who flew from Paris to Dublin. Dublin being perfectly safe, Paris being perfectly safe, and who knows where before then, before emerging in Northern Ireland. Details on that. How do Brits make their... OK, violence isn't the answer. Setting fire to stuff and potentially people is definitely not the answer. But what is? What is the answer? How do Brits make their voice heard? Also this afternoon, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson has warned parents against coddling their children, saying overprotection is shielding the next generation from the real world. As figures reveal, over 1 million young people are currently not in employment, education or training. Is that connected to molly-coddling parents? And Rachel Reeves has opened the door to yet more tax rises, this time to fund defence spending, as the Chancellor once again signals that hard-working Brits will be the first in line to foot the bill. Who else can she turn to? Details to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Mark says, you see, Keir Starmer will be smiling at your current caller, I think it was the last one before the news, and working out how to suppress further protest. Listening is not on his agenda, and as for acting on our concerns, not in his lifetime. The problem is when you become a politician, what you have to have, and I suppose in a way it kind of makes sense, whether you're left-wing, right-wing, somewhere in the middle, you have to have a sort of an intrinsic belief, a genuine inner belief that you know something most people don't know. So you are in possession of a dimension of wisdom and kind of in an inner voice of supreme knowledge that most people don't have. You have to think that about yourself. And then whatever way your politics go depends on how you implement that. And I see it with, I mean, he's our current Prime Minister, but you can talk to him about a whole bunch of stuff and his eyes will glaze over. He doesn't really understand because they're not areas that he majors in or in his political DNA. Kemi Badenoch is also a politician, of course, and one such person who I'm sure believes she has that inner core of wisdom. She can do stuff no one else has ever thought of. One thing she's come up with is taking on the race row around stop and search, pledging to triple its use and telling the police to ignore the controversy if it means saving lives. Let's have a listen to the Tory leader speaking yesterday.
The reason why we want to triple stop and search and hire 10,000 more police officers is because we believe that this will lead to safer streets. I'm afraid it doesn't matter if more black boys are searched because it will mean more black lives are saved.
Kemi Badenoch speaking yesterday. Let's speak with Ken Hines, CEO of Communities Against Violence. Don't want to put words in your mouth, Ken. By the way, good to see you again, but I'm going to assume you couldn't disagree more with everything Kemi Badenoch has just said.
Absolutely right. It's so irresponsible to have those sort of incendiary words that she was using. It beggars belief because for the last 50 years, where I've been affected around bad policing and bad interaction with the police, we've had so many different reports, Macpherson, Scarman, Casey report, and even David Lammy, that points to two-tier policing, that we need to narrow the gap. Now, what she wants to do is widen it again, which is unacceptable. We work too hard on the ground, saving lives by getting young people to give up their knives and also to tackle what we call their red mist in a more constructive way. Now, if you're gonna do more stops and search, we're 9 times more likely now, it would be 27 times more likely under her submission. It's just going to lead to more problems.
Is it going to lead to more problems? Okay, because from what I can gather, look, there was a time, the numbers speak for themselves. I always imagine that if you're a black guy and you hear white people talking about two-tier policing, you probably either want to cry or laugh. And but because, of course, the arguments, and we've discussed it many, many times, have been there and well, not just rehearsed, but played out many, many times, and I get it. So the numbers are there. You know, a black kid, when I was growing up, driving a Ford Escort, was much more likely to get pulled up in his car than me driving my Ford Escort. And that, by the way, is a very real example, because my mate Dan, who had the same car as me, was always getting pulled over. I got pulled over once. So I don't have any trouble intelligently understanding it. Now, of course, in a bid to try and address that, what appears to have happened is that a lot of politicians, a lot of police, got the wobbles and said, well, we better stop everything. Kemi Badenoch is saying, well, hang on a second, there are still some stats that do speak for themselves. Young black boys, 6% of the population in London, nearly 14% of knife-related criminality. Surely there's something in that we need to look at, and if stop and search helps, not the full answer, no pulling over kids in their Ford Escorts in the same sense, but surely that's what she wants to get to.
But I would ask this: if that's 14% of the knife crime, who's committing the 86% that we're not really talking about?
But we're talking about disproportionality, aren't we?
Whether you're talking about disproportionality or whatever, the simple fact is, black youngsters aren't the only people committing knife crime.
But they're overrepresented in that particular crime.
But if you can just focus on the marginalised community, because the very reason I would say that substantially increases that figure is the simple fact that black youngsters are less likely to report a crime to the police. They are more unlikely get their mates involved and take the law into their own hands. That's unacceptable. This is what we're fighting against.
So what do you do then if there is an overproportion? I mean, look, I think I've said this to you before. If I'm a cop, I'd probably make the worst cop in the world, because if I'm looking for a football hooligan and I'm out there going down the King's Road in my police car, if you've got a grade 2 haircut and you're white, you're getting in the back of that car. You're going to be over my bonnet, cuffed and down the station within seconds. If you're a black kid sitting there in Tottenham on a street corner, you're 13 and it's 2 in the morning, bang, you're in the back, you're in the nick, mate. That's how I would play it. Sometimes stereotypes are there for a reason, right?
Even if it's 2 in the afternoon and you're in Tottenham sitting down there, bang, you're aggressively talked to, put in handcuffs, and often put in a cell for up to 24 hours before letting go with no further action. It has not only psychological but physical effect on people. And my trauma or my bad experience become other people's bad experience, like that pebble in the pond that has a ripple effect. We need to tackle it from the core. What's causing this? Why is it that we are not approaching the police to report crime? Why is it that we prefer to not to get involved in anything when we need to? We need to have a community that's fit for all. You know?
That's true, but we've spent all this time, you know, Theresa May had very sort of traditionally unconservative views on stop and search. She would have supported much of what you were saying, Ken. I think that's a fair representation of her. I'm sure you wouldn't see her as the perfect role model in this one, but she was in that ballpark. Yeah. Others would sort of argue, well, actually, you know, we shouldn't shun. Stop and search is there for a reason. We do have, well, what are we meant to do? We took our foot off the gas. We haven't solved the problem. We still have community problems. Young black kids, arguably, today have a worse view of the police than perhaps those kids growing up in the 70s when things were demonstrably divided.
Let me say, there's consequence when you're doing these stop and search. People say, well, you've got nothing to hide, then what's the problem? The problem is simply if it adds to your mental illness. Look what's happened at Southampton and Northern Ireland. Mental illness is the driver behind this, and we've got to realise that when you're pushing hard in one way, there's unintended consequences in other avenues.
So what do we do? Do we not chase, you know, gangs of kids in gangs who, in this case, are more likely to be young black kids? What are we meant to do? Take a hands-off approach?
Not necessarily. I saw in Southend when they were called to arms, it was generally white kids doing that. So I'm saying there's different parts of the country will have different issues, but with common ground. The common ground is what's being pushed on social media, what the media, irresponsible media reporting like Nigel Farage and Kimi Badenoch is to add to that group, to say that we have to have a knee-jerk reaction. When you make decision from a dark space, in my experience, I don't get good outcomes.
She says it's
from a joy space, it comes better.
She says, talking about tripling stop and search, if you have to, if it means saving lives. Now, when you put it like that, what is wrong with those words, Ken?
I tell you what's wrong with these words. They're just words. What about, how do you go about making that a reality when you don't have the confidence or the trust of that very same community that's disproportionately affected, both as victim and perpetrators, because you generally find it's generally black on other black youngsters that's been affected. So I'm just saying to them that this is where we are. We have to look at somewhere as to the underlying issue. Don't marginalize us furthermore, because I know how it impacted on me in a negative way.
I get that.
And it's taken me a long time to get over it.
But you were experiencing the police in a kind of Life on Mars Sweeney kind of vibe back in the day. I don't want to date you too much, Ken. You still look like a young man to me, but you take the point. It would have been... I mean, the old Bill, surely, are not that anymore.
They're not, but we're still carrying our prejudice. And what it is, what I see is a two-tier policing is if they see 5 white youngsters outside McDonald's, they'll have a different approach when they're approaching them to 5 young black youngsters, where they will use excessive force generally, pushing them on the ground, put them in handcuffs before trying to have that dialogue and expect to have a reasonable dialogue. It doesn't work. We are carrying so much trauma from our generational trauma that's caused by bad policing throughout. This is why the disproportionality in the stop and search still remains today, because it's systematic, which is different to a white boy saying, oh, anti-white racism he's facing. Hello, welcome to our world. And this is the world that we've had to navigate for many years.
On that point, Ken, it's very passionate stuff. Thank you for coming on. Ken Hines, CEO of Communities Against Violence. I'm not going to try and walk in his shoes. He's a black guy. I'm not. He's experienced all manner of issues around racism. He has his own views on the police that I haven't experienced in any shape or form. So he's allowed that. And no one can argue against his own experience. However, what do you make of what he says? What I find really fascinating is that if you... And Matt, the more you think about this is really... We're doing a lot of talking about two-tier policing, right? A lot of people making the comments that, you know, the police are stacked against white people. And Ken Hines, I mean, I almost said it for him, is either laughing or crying at those comments, thinking, what are you talking about? This is nonsense. Now, the whole two-tier thing, I mean, if you look at the College of... We read it out every day last week, the College of Policing, the advice on this or the guidelines, whatever you want to talk about it. It's pretty blatant that there is a directive or advisory, however, different... I'm sure different cops will interpret it different ways to kind of balance the books, if you like. So Ken would say young black kids have been stopped disproportionately for years. And the police have gone... Yes, they have. So the way to address that is, whereas before we'd turn up outside McDonald's, there were 5 black kids on one side, 5 white kids on the other side, we'd leave the white kids alone and address or sometimes arrest the black kids. This is the crude allegation, OK, that's being put to the police. So what the police have done is said, right, we're going to leave the black kids alone and treat them the same as the white kids. And that's now become two-tier policing, but the other way round. Because in leaving them alone, they have, on occasions, allowed some criminal act or whatever to take place. It's a bit of a foggy picture, isn't it? How do you dissect this one? from everything Ken's just said. Genuinely interested in your views on this. 0344 499 1000. Barry in County Antrim says people are angry because politicians don't want to address their constituents' concerns over immigration. Riot is the language of the unheard. It's justified until politicians listen. And the only area that I would take, that I would kind of take an argument to on this is that I've never thought that if you... The kind of people that are willing to smash up someone's front door and walk in when their kids are there and there's fire going off and there's frightened children, I don't think those people are genuinely and intelligently politically engaged. I think they're angry. I don't know if they know what they're angry about, and I'm sure it's a whole number of things. And whether they were in Southport, whether they're in Southampton, whether they're in Belfast, I think those that carry out that kind of violence, as distinct from all the others that turn up and protest because they're pretty bloody peed off, I think there is a distinction there. Tracy is in Hereford on this point. Tracy, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, I think our politicians just aren't listening to us. Violence, it isn't the way ahead. But I also believe, and I think a lot of people are the same, that we think our government is complicit into bringing these people into the country. They all seem to be from these third world countries. It's clear that they're not escaping war-torn places, because why would you leave your wife and kids there? I'm sure some of them are married and got children. But I do think, and people think I'm a crackpot for saying this, I do think our country, Starmer, along with the other governments in the West, are pushing this to push the digital ID through, and I do think it's part of this 2030 agenda. I really do, because I just think everything that seems to be going on is sort of ticking all the boxes that way. The more people you bring in, the more divide it causes. The more, I think he's waiting for us to kick off so that he can bring in curfews and lockdowns, which I'm just not going to be part of that again.
Do you think, I mean, people talk about the 2030 agenda and some will say it's a conspiracy theory, others will say, well, you know, governments have always had agendas for the future, just their governments, they have to. But is there anything sinister in there, then, that you're thinking is going to... I mean, you mentioned lockdown, so what, you create chaos and then you know, there's sort of problem-solution issue?
Well, I know people keep saying he's a useless Prime Minister, and that, you know, I keep hearing reporters say, oh, he'll be going soon. I've never known somebody swim through so much crap and still be in the job. He's clever. I do think this is part of his plan. I think that, you know, he's not a stupid man. He just comes across that way.
But is he doing, in this respect, though, Tracy, is he doing anything that Rishi Sunak didn't do? I mean, I'm not talking... I mean, obviously, we've had... I mean, they're not all connected, but there are connections between different issues. What happened in Belfast 2 nights ago... I mean, I'm not going to blame Keir Starmer specifically for the horrendous actions of one individual, but we can blame successive governments, if this is an immigration issue, on immigration and borders and people coming in.
They're not. Yeah, I know that previous governments are nowhere near innocent in this. Maybe he's coming across worse then, because he just doesn't listen. He shows utter contempt, and like when he stood up in the House of Commons today and every other time, his answer is to shut the argument down. You know, when Richard Tice stood up, it was straight away, oh, you know, you're inciting violence and that, and he'll do everything to get the left and all the other lunatics on his side, and I think, no, you're not addressing the problem here.
Correct, and that is my bit. Look, I'm not going to endorse riots or anything, but one of the many reasons, and there's lots of reasons to be grumpy about somebody setting fire to a home with kids in it, and goodness knows what else. But my other concern was that the minute it kicks off, it gives Keir Starmer a great excuse to ignore the issue and just talk about the violence. Listen, Tracy, I have to move. You've been great, and I love the passion as well. Thank you. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Valdo Calacane was a 32-year-old black man. He murdered 3 white people. Not once in any part of the conversation or reporting was there any racial profiling or even the question raised.
I don't want to drag this boy onto the issues, not onto Henry, and that is something that the family have asked for.
35 years I've been doing this. I've never seen a moment when most of mainstream media and most of mainstream politics was more out of touch with the country than over this issue. Quite extraordinary.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Carl in Derbyshire says, bizarrely, the political class think anger and rage are rational emotions. The political class think anger and rage are matter. Don't the political class think they're irrational emotions? I mean, Keir would say they're irrational, aren't they? Anger, rage is irrational. I guess it depends on where you sit politically. Tad says, Ian, I don't hold with the violent protest, but there's something that must be borne in mind. When a public is afraid of its government, we have tyranny. When the government is afraid of the people, we have democracy. We haven't yet reached the latter. Until we do, we'll keep getting taken for a ride. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? 2029 can't come fast enough. If only to solve, like, one of many, many issues that we have in this country right now. And that is this sort of... The Starmer thing is just... Is it Keir Starmer? I mean, yes, it is Keir Starmer. Or is it the fact that we just reached a point... We'd had COVID in the sort of 2020, 2021, 22, never really fully recovered from it economically and in lots of other ways as well. Mass issues around the welfare bill, issues around the world being more insecure than it was in the flipping 40s, for goodness sake, for maybe different reasons, but nonetheless. Was it just the perfect sweet point for whoever got in 2024 to be greeted with an avalanche, a tsunami of brown-coloured jip on a daily basis, but particularly pronounced when Keir Starmer was the recipient? He's not very good at being Prime Minister. I don't know. Was it bad? So 2029 will be almost the kind of great reset, as somebody famous once said, but one that might work for us. Would that be fair? But we won't know, of course, until it happens, if it happens. And what does it even look like? Is that a reform kind of Conservative coalition mash-up thing? Let's talk to Ivan in Oxford. This is back to the issue of stop and search, Ivan. Afternoon to you, sir.
Hello there, hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay, Ian?
Loud and clear, yeah. What's going on?
Yeah, hi there, Ian. I caught the last couple of minutes or so from the previous caller that phoned in just recently. I think it may have been an ex-police officer who was talking about the way that police officers approach groups of black youths as opposed...
I think that was Ken Hines. He's a community worker and has worked for years sort of in communities about, you know, with issues around stop and search. And so he's been a bit of a bridge between police and community over the years. That, I think, is roughly defines his background.
Right, OK. You say a bridge, very much a broken bridge.
I was about to say, maybe it's a broken bridge.
Yeah, and he's just created an even greater division between black people and white people. I'm of second generation mixed race. My father came over here from Guyana in the 50s. He joined the army. I joined the RAF, and then I served for 25 years in the police service. And in my experience, and it is my experience, I'm not kind of making it up or jumping on any bandwagon. But the case with the police is completely the opposite to what Ken was saying.
Interesting.
Within my first week of being stationed in the Oxford area, I was taken out by the inspector to be shown around the various areas. We went to one area, and there was a group of black people who started throwing stones at the police, our police vehicle. And no word of a lie, and this is back in 1987, the inspector then said, "We can't do anything because it's going to create more problems than it will,
wow.
Than we would solve."
So even 40 years ago, people were saying that stuff.
Even back then, Ian.
Yeah.
And I find it amazing that people like Ken are still saying that the police service, police officers, that those people who go, we go out there every day to try and make the world a better place, and that he is saying that we inherently, for some reason, have it up against, have disproportionate views, racist views towards black people. It's just the total opposite, Ian. It's unbelievable, and I think that most decent-minded black people will probably not get engaged in discussions like this because it's just fruitless. But we feel so uncomfortable because of the way that DEI is now being pushed.
Yeah, exactly, and I can't imagine, and I speak to a fair amount of cops, Ivan. I can't imagine, two 40-year-old white cops sitting in a police car today with CCTV all over the show, including perpetrators holding their phones, body-worn cams. I can't imagine two white cops going, let's go out and look for some black kids to stop. I mean, that would be weird, wouldn't it?
It is. It just wouldn't occur. We were all just police officers. Whether you were black or white, times were different, and the jokes made about each other were different. I remember joining the RAF, and the humour there was what would be seen now as totally acceptable. But in that time, it was the culture, it was the way that things were done, and I just feel so saddened by the way that we are bending over to appease the wrong people. I look at bad black people and feel so ashamed, because they don't represent black people. I can't for one moment understand why this chap Ken is still harking on at the fact that police officers discriminate against black people.
Yeah, it's been his kind of, it's been his sort of lifelong narrative, and I don't imagine he's going to put it down anytime soon. Listen, Ivan, I have to move, sir, but great angle on this, and thank you. Really good call from Ivan in Oxford, mixed race officer, ex-police officer, 25 years experience in the job, so he knows his stuff. 0344 499 1000. Ben in Stockwell says most people who take part in such riots are usually struggling financially, uneducated, or have been hibernating racists. I'm sure that's all of that and others. I mean, when you talk about a protest, are you talking about people who kick off during a protest or people who just protest? Because going out and standing in a crowd because you are disturbed and distressed and have had enough and can sense that what you're seeing in your area isn't just a terrible crime, but a terrible crime that's linked to the ineptitude of our political masters, the government. local councils, etc. If you feel that and want to turn up and show that, there's nothing wrong with that. When you take it to another level, then yeah, I'm sure there's a few knuckle draggers in the pack there as well. But it does raise the question that if we condemn, and I think everybody from Nigel Farage's Reform to Julia Hartley-Brewer, if you like, and everyone in between, has condemned the horrors of arson and riots and setting fire to things and hurting people and scaring the bejesus out of young kids, etc. If we all accept that is bad, it's fair to ask the question, how do Brits make their voices heard? What is your answer to that question? 0344 499 1000. We're going to move on to something slightly different. We'll continue to take calls on this and all the other stuff, stop and search, you name it. It's all up for grabs. Something else on your way, and it involves Rachel Reeves, coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 3. Now, Britain's ageing Royal Navy fleet could be left without a replacement as Keir Starmer considers axing the next generation of guided missile destroyers to plug a funding gap. It's the latest sign that the government's defence spending row is it putting national security at risk, of course, is one of the major questions on this. We'll talk about the tax implications as well, about asking perhaps those that bother to go to work to raise more money to boost defence spending. We'll talk to Anne Strickland from the Taxpayers Alliance in just a moment. First, though, Mark Francois, MP, Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford, also Shadow Defence Minister. Always good to see you, Mark. It's interesting, I was watching PMQs and there was Keir Starmer almost talking about his proud track record of funding and being pro-military. Doesn't seem to be borne out in stories such as this.
Indeed not. And in fact, thank you for having me on, Ian. I've just come literally hot foot from the Chamber of the House of Commons. We've just had what's called an urgent question, a kind of emergency debate, following on from Prime Minister's questions. The Speaker of the House of Commons was livid because there is a rumour. We've been waiting for months and months for this Defence Investment Plan, the DIP, to be published to tell us how the government will pay for all the proposals in their Strategic Defence Review, which was published a year ago. The Speaker was livid, and I use the word deliberately, it's the way the Telegraph have described it, because there is a rumour now that the government are going to publish it on Friday, deliberately, when the House of Commons is not sitting.
Yeah.
So the MPs couldn't ask questions that day of the government about what's in it and how this, including what happens to the Type 83 air defence destroyer, which is a critical capability. So there was basically a massive Barney. My boss, the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartledge, challenged Luke Pollard, the Defence Minister, multiple times, as did other MPs, to rule out it being published on Friday, and the minister repeatedly refused to do that. So we've now got a big running parliamentary row. This thing was promised faithfully in the autumn, and we were absolutely going to get it by Christmas. Then we were definitely going to get it in the new year. And now we're in virtually the middle of June. NATO has a sort of index for comparing how countries are meeting their commitments and their readiness to fight. We are 31st out of 32, and the only people below us are Iceland, and they don't have any armed forces. so this
is Monty Python territory, Mark, right?
Yeah, on one level it is. You're right, but there's a very serious side to it.
Of course there is.
Ukraine. No, I'm not contending. Well, I have some sympathy with what you just said. I'm a big Monty Python fan, but you've got all of the tension in the Gulf. You've got the war in Ukraine, and this plan to equip our armed forces, including the new destroyers, is nearly a year late, and still today the government refused to say when it will be published, and they're hinting it might be published deliberately when the House of Commons isn't sitting.
Did the Speaker, Mark, make any?
Star Trek, we would say this is a government, Jim, but not as we know it.
Indeed. Did the Speaker make any intervention on that point? Because, you know, he's the man in charge of protocols and the like. Did he offer his disquiet to this clear trick coming from the government?
So to explain to your viewers, before the urgent question, before the emergency debate started, the Speaker said, you know, I want to say something. And he absolutely berated the government, firstly, for not having published it anyway, after so long, but more fundamentally for the rumour that it's going to be published on Friday when the House isn't sitting. The MOD have been briefing any journalist who would listen it was going to be tomorrow. It might yet be tomorrow, but it looks more likely it's Friday or even next week. And rightfully, the Speaker was furious because, look, people go to the polls in an election. They elect members of Parliament of whichever political party. And our job is to ask questions. We are here to hold the government of the day to account. And you can't do that if they make key announcements. And oh, by the way, this is just the defence of the realm, deliberately when Parliament isn't sitting. So the Speaker was defending the rights of British people via their members of Parliament to hold the government to account, and all credit to him for doing so.
We'll watch with interest. Just a final point, Mark. This idea of, 5% GDP, defence spending, etc. We're hearing stories today that Rachel Reeves is opening the door to boost taxes in order to raise taxes in order to boost defence spending. Give us your take on that, and separately but obviously connected, what is the way that a government could get defence spending back up to where it should be?
Well, our policy in the Conservatives under Kemi is that we should be spending 3% by the end of this Parliament. So we've nailed our colours to the mast in the way that the government refused to do. I know we're tight for time, so let me try and summarise it succinctly for you. The people in this country pay more than enough tax as it is. My constituents tell me that every day of the week. We must fund our defences, but the way that we do that is not to increase taxation, it is to reduce spending on welfare. We've said we would reintroduce the 2-child benefit cap and use half of the money that saves to invest in defence. It's just one example. So the net answer to your question is, yes, we must spend more on defence in a dangerous world, but we don't do that by taxing the British people till, their eyes start to bleed. We do it by reducing welfare spending. That's how we manage to keep the first duty of government above all others, which is the defence of the realm.
And that's a fine point to finish on. Mark, great to have you on. Always good to speak. Mark Francois, MP, Shadow Defence Minister. Thank you to him. Let's speak with Anne Strickland, researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance. Afternoon to you, Anne. Good to see you. I think that last point, I don't know if you heard what Mark Francois just said at the very end there. It's not about raising taxes. This should be about cutting spending. And boy, could I give you a pie chart or two to show you where we could cut spending. We've all got our own little pet areas where it's clearly out of control. He mentioned welfare there as being probably the most obvious one, which is completely unsustainable. So your view then, if you would, Anne, on the Rachel Reeves hinting that more taxes are on their way in order to fund defence?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You know, we are looking at a record high tax burden. And the answer is not, you know, it's good that she's not thinking of borrowing more to pay for defence. But the answer is not more tax rises. It is, you know, as your previous caller said, it's cutting spending, it's cutting welfare, it's cutting things like the civil service, it's cutting net zero projects. There are innumerate areas of spending that could be cut to fund defence. You know, defence is effectively the primary role of the state to defend the citizens of this country. Quite frankly, the current government is incapable of doing that. You know, we've seen how they were with when the Iran war kicked off, that we weren't even able to get anything out to Cyprus. Our defence capabilities are not up to scratch, but to fund them through higher taxes is just not the way of doing it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I suppose you could say, well, it's sort of in Labour's DNA, isn't it? When they consider that instinctively that's their go-to position. Most people, I'd like to think, anyone who knows anything about finance, economics or tax would simply say, well, where are we spending too much money? There's multiple areas. The obvious one is welfare, because it's clearly out of control. Something needs to be done. But as a Labour government, this is their safe space, isn't it? Raise taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, their instinctual position is always tax more, spend more, tax more, spend more, instead of actually, you know, rejigging the budgets, thinking about where that money is actually going, whether it's being efficiently spent. I mean, I think most people would agree that defence probably does need more spending on it to sort of get it up to that 5% of GDP figure. But even if Labour did another round of tax hikes comparable to what they've done in their previous two budgets, raising, you know, over £60 billion, it still wouldn't get them up to that 5% of GDP figure. So tax rises, you know, is not the way to go about it. It is getting spending cuts from elsewhere and putting that money towards defence.
Yeah. Is there any hope? I mean, they did try, didn't they, a little while ago, sort of early doors, to test the water on, well, not even cutting welfare, just sort of slightly arresting the rise in spending on welfare. Backbenchers absolutely lost their mind. They were discombobulating. People were fanning their faces to get them awake from the faint that they'd had as a result of this idea that the Labour government were going to tinker around with welfare spending. So it's not an area Starmer is comfortable going to again, I would guess, and Rachel Reeves would probably concur with that. So much easier to go for people who actually go to work.
Yeah, exactly. You know, they, the current government, are appeasing to their backbenchers. Their backbenchers have made it explicitly clear that they are not happy with any addressing to welfare. But it needs to happen, and it's either going to happen sooner and be less damaging to the rest of the country, or it's going to happen down the line when, you know, potentially there could be an IMF bailout if spending gets so out of control. I mean, our welfare bill, looking at the end of this decade, is going to be over £400 billion a year, which is absolutely obscene. The fact that we are spending more in welfare than we are bringing in income tax is purely unsustainable. It has to be addressed.
Indeed. Anne, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that. Anne Strickland, who's a researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance. It's more than just the elephant in the room, isn't it? Because it is talked about. But the elephant bit, I suppose, is no one's talking about, are they actually going to do something about this? 400 billion by the end of the decade, I think she just said there. And that's more than the money that comes in for that department. I mean, this is just utter lunacy. It can't remain the case. Or you just, I don't know, maybe Andy Burnham will be the Prime Minister, and if that is the case, you just hike the top rate tax up to 60p and hope it sticks. I think that might be the thinking to come. 0344 499 1000. This one from Mark, who says, if Farage does sound like Starmer, he won't last 5 minutes. I was making the point earlier, for those who didn't hear the point, that when it comes to responding to Belfast, and you hear politicians, particularly prime ministers, say we utterly condemn this, and, you know, we're on the side of the police, we will not put up with this behaviour. If Nigel Farage was standing there at the dispatch board as Prime Minister, would his response have sounded much different? And you can replace the word Farage for Badenoch, for Davey, for Burnett, for anyone you like. Whoever is the Prime Minister, do they not always end up saying something a bit like that? Back with more of your calls coming next on Talk.
Varlic Halakane was a 32-year-old black man. He murdered 3 white people. Not once in any part of the conversation or reporting was there any racial profiling or even the question raised.
I don't want to drag this boy onto the issues, not onto Henry, and that is something that the family have asked for.
35 years I've been doing this. I've never seen a moment when most of mainstream media and most of mainstream politics was more out of touch with the country than over this issue. Quite extraordinary.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. This from Mark, who says, if you want a prediction, I suggest future riots will involve the tearing down of surveillance cameras as well as the cordoning off of police to prevent the witness of serious crime. The threat of retribution will not deter protesters. We mentioned at the beginning, because when we have these stories and people feel angry, you and I feel angry, and lots of the politicians we have on feel angry, and we talk to perhaps maybe too many like-minded people who also share the anger. But the equation, I always say this, don't I, that, you know, whether we're in a bubble and how scary it is. Because if you listen to our bubble wants common sense, it wants hands-off approach from the state, it wants immigration robustly addressed once and for all, not tinkered with, absolute, demonstrable, tangible result. If you listen to all of that, you think, yeah, that's what everybody thinks. And then somebody comes along and says, you do realise that actually more than half the population, more than half, fundamentally disagree with you. And you start to go, right, OK, ooh, that's a bit tricky, isn't it? That's quite a lot of people who have a totally different view. We were talking about social media yesterday and its authenticity or lack of, depending on where you sit. And I noticed did you clock this, Finn? There's a new sort of news group setting up, a new broadcast media organisation from the left who are, like, you know, you've got the Canary and Novara Media and all that, kind of another one of those. And when I saw that, I thought, it's hilarious, isn't it? Good luck with that. And then I remembered, oh, right, there's probably quite a lot of those guys as well. So you have this curious battleground. I can't remember some of the names. Mehdi Hussain, that I think was one of the people that was part of it, possibly running it. And maybe even was Owen Jones involved in it as well. Oh, dear. But, you know, there is appetite for those, yeah. Before we speak to David in Cheshire, not on this point, but on the we've got the Voice of Doom. Voice of Doom, brand new voice. It went yesterday. I've forgotten the name of the woman who it was. Remember? Lucy Rigby, who is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. It's a very senior job, as it happens. She may be fairly anonymous, but she's massively significant in the government. Lucy Rigby was the one yesterday. It was one, which means we've got a brand new voice today. Remember, it's a mystery voice. You're looking for a politician, left-wing or right-wing, dead or alive. Who is this?
I think it's a national calamity.
Yeah. Now, every time I think it's doable, nobody gets it right. Here it is again.
I think it's a national calamity.
And again.
I think it's a national calamity.
87222, it's the only way to get in touch. 87222, if you think you know who that is. If we get a correct answer, then after the news headlines, we'll reveal who it is. If not, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
I think it's a national calamity.
Will it get one, or will it roll over to tomorrow? Find out. Do you know, I think I've got a bit of man flu kicking in. Finn's like, he's not buying into this. I can spare a thought for the man working his cods off at this end. And I'm full of Nurofen. What are you meant to do about that? David's in Cheshire. David, hello.
Hi, Ian, you okay?
I'm all right, thanks, apart from the man flu. Far away.
Ian, I've heard a lot today about people saying that violence doesn't change anything. It's empirical research has indicated that electrical democracies are statistically more accommodated and yield to demands of violent protests. You can imagine people over the last few years have heard whenever there's been an atrocity, there'll be change, lessons will be learned, and still nothing changes.
Yeah, no lessons are learned.
No lessons are learned. And we only got to look back over fairly recent history, the water war in the Bolivia in 2000. Policy changed after violent uprising.
Yeah.
The Yellow Vests in France, policy totally changed by Macron. Los Angeles riots in 1992.
Sure.
Everything changed after Rodney King. Northern Ireland violence, everything changed after that. Nothing will change unless people are made to change it. And if people are happy with the status quo and just go along with, be quiet, we'll take care of it, we'll change it, and nothing changes, I don't know what people can expect. I don't know. I honestly don't know what the powers that be expect the public to put up with.
Is it, I mean, do the government, I don't mean this government specifically, does the system, if you like, know that much like a pandemic, you know, every now and again, every 20 years, one of these things will come around. And then there'll also be other things that are cyclical. There'll be moments of disquiet and riot, and people will talk about immigration a lot, and then that will go away as well. Do they work on that basis? I mean, I would argue that if they do work on that basis, and they probably do, that they might be in for a bit of a shock, because I don't think this thing's going away now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the news cycle changes so quickly. You only have to talk to people, and people have forgot what happened on the bridges in London to Rigby.
Yeah,
it changed, and it's only when a spark ignites their memories again and it goes. But by the government saying keep quiet, keep calm, we'll take care of it, another news cycle kicks in, and they think, oh it's over now. We can move on to something else that they'll have forgotten. That's I think the problem, and people can only take so much, Ian, and if they've got no other course of action, it's going to spill out somewhere. And I think I've heard the politicians who are in charge don't realise what's going on. I can't believe that. They've got 600 politicians in place in all corners of the country who should be telling them what's going on. Why don't they know how the public feel?
Why don't they know how the public feel? Well, they probably do, but maybe they're satisfied, as we were just saying, David, that actually it's still a small contingent, and and within the small contingent, it's a smaller contingent that will kick off eventually, because when you if there's public disorder, you can get a lengthy prison sentence for that, so perhaps people will stop doing it. I don't know. I mean, is that the thinking? Is it sort of, do they take it on the chin and it will just disappear?
Well, I think you're probably right. I think the young people that can see that their futures are limited by job opportunities, home opportunities, and when they release their frustrations like we've seen over the last few days, who gets put into prison? Those young people.
Yeah. Spot on. Listen, David, great call. You've given me more questions than answers now, and we can continue this. David in Cheshire, thank you to him. One in from Brian, who says, every time, Collins, this debate comes up, stop and search, Dinosaur Ken gets wheeled out, acting as if policing in 2026 is the same as it was decades ago. It isn't. Officers are scrutinised, recorded and monitored at every turn. The real question is, where's the concern for the victims and their family, most of whom are black? Too often the debate centres on offenders and police tactics, while communities living with violent crime are left as an afterthought. Equality means equal treatment under law, not different rules based on identity. Thank you for that, Brian. Here's the brand new voice of doom.
I think it's a national calamity.
If you think you know who that is, 87222. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. Home of common sense and so much to get through here this afternoon, of course. We are continuing to respond to those riots in Belfast last night. Masked protesters targeting migrant homes, setting fire to vehicles and businesses. This, of course, followed the charging of a Sudanese asylum seeker with attempted murder, with it emerging that the man had been granted refugee status and leave to remain until 2028. It's an interesting story. Quite a lot of the specifics we can't talk about because it's now very much a live case. But the broader question about, if we all agree riots, terrible thing, not a good look, how in that case do Brits make their voices heard? Also, Kemi Badenoch has called for the police to triple stop and search, warning that political correctness must not stand in the way of saving lives. She's pledging that a future Conservative government would not bow to race row pressure. More comment on that from you. And Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson has warned parents against coddling their kids, saying overprotection is shielding the next generation from the real world, as figures reveal that over 1 million young people currently are not in employment, education or training. Is that because they were soft-soaped growing up? What is going on? Details on the way. We'll bring you, of course, all the latest news too. 03444 499 1000. The voice of doom. Do we have a winner? Find out in just a bit. And, of course, more comment coming in from you. Let's move then to this story. Homes, businesses and police cars, of course, set ablaze last night, and we are familiar with the details as rioting broke out following the charging of the Sudanese asylum seeker over that sickening knife attack. Now, the violence has been widely condemned, but it comes as communities across the city demand answers as to who is being housed in their neighbourhoods. Let's speak to Mick Fealty, founding editor of Slugger O'Toole. Mick, good to have you with us. On that last point, people wanting to know who lives in their neighbourhoods. No one's condemning setting fire to someone's house. That's a terrible thing, obviously. Supermarkets, buses and goodness knows what. But the overarching concerns that people have, which has kind of come out as a result of this, are those concerns very real?
I think they are to some extent. Now, as far as riots are concerned, this is not Belfast's first rodeo. I mean, I remember we're well practiced at it, and in this, not only have we got a T-shirt, we've got many T-shirts going back many, many years. So there's a kind of a dark infrastructure in Belfast that allows this stuff to really rock and roll whenever there's a triggering point just like this. There are concerns, definitely, in Belfast. Particularly, but it kind of splits down the sectarian divide. It's mainly loyalist working class areas, and strangely enough, this incident happened in a nationalist working class area. But there's concerns really since Brexit that even the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework did not touch. We don't know a lot of the details about how this person came to claim asylum in the UK and particularly in Northern Ireland. But from what we understand, the details that have been officially released, he came from Paris to Dublin and then settled in Belfast. And because we're now outside the EU, it is very difficult. If he'd been stopped in in Dublin, he could and probably should have been returned under the Belfast Agreement directly back to Paris from whence he came. But once he's embedded in Belfast in the United Kingdom, we don't have the agreement to basically put those people back to where they came from. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that is worrying people. The border, as a result of Brexit, is frictionless. So it's very easy once you're past the authorities in Dublin to settle in Belfast.
And I keep reading, Mick, that this is, he's not the first person to have done this. This is kind of like a bit of a loophole, if you want to look at it like that many people have walked before.
Yeah, it's a soft underbelly. This is an unsecured border between the UK and the European Union. And I guess people understand that and they know that. Although it's interesting, this guy basically stayed in Belfast and didn't attempt to come back onto mainland Britain. But it is clearly one of those soft points left behind by the various agreements that were stitched together after the UK left the European Union.
In terms of where this story goes next, as you said, there weren't a lot of Sinn Féin-sponsored balaclavas over there, I noticed, in in those riots, and it is an area that the local authorities are, as you say, au fait with. Not the first rodeo, as you rightly identified, Mick. So many years' experience of dealing with disquiet, and frankly, I thought that they did an incredible job. There was a sort of, I don't want to say hands-off, but I think you know what I mean. Tactically, there's two ways they can go, right? They can steam in with batons, or they can just say, right, let's see how this plays out, because we're not going to make it any worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things the PSNI, the local police force, has learned to do over the last 25 years since the peace process kicked in after the conflict is to handle some of these very single identity areas, because Belfast, by and large, in middle class areas, is mixed between Catholics and Protestants, and neither. But in the working class areas, it does tend to be a little bit oil and water. And what they have come to understand is that a gentle approach, but taking documentation, taking camera footage, and then appealing directly to avoid direct physical conflict. As I say, you know, there is a dark infrastructure in working class Belfast, and provoking that probably makes things worse. But we'll see. What the police chief constable this morning has warned on local radio is, please, if you understand, you know someone who is planning to go out and riot again tonight, intervene with them, tell them that once they're arrested and the evidence is arraigned and the conviction kicks in, this is a life-changing experience. So they're doing two things. They're laying the trap, if you like, but they're also trying to get in early and say to the communities, you need to do what you can to make sure this doesn't flare up again.
Yeah. What is the kind of intel, Mick? What are you hearing, the word on the street? Because, of course, social media, not always the oracle of, you know, where to go in terms of what's likely to happen, because there's a confused picture. But certainly there is a sense that some people think that this isn't over yet.
There's certainly tensions. There have been social media itself has been used, and with AI now, Ian, what you've got is people who can produce what looks like convincing and almost official notices, basically warning people to close their businesses at 11. The roads, and there's one that I've seen that basically identifies 26 pinch points that those roads will be closed.
I saw that.
And that there is basically not going to be any tolerance. And that really comes out of that. We don't know who's behind all of this, but we do know there is a history, a culture of paramilitary activity. And this is that dark infrastructure that I was talking to. Whether it materializes in reality, that's another question.
It is indeed. Mick, great to have you on, sir. Thank you very much for your time. Mick Fealty, he's the founding editor of Slugger O'Toole. Look him up and discover more. Thank you to him. Back to you. This one from from Graham. Who says, I've just heard Starmer say the violence in Northern Ireland last night is totally unjustified. What is really unjustified are all the illegal migrants that are coming into the UK. They are being forced on us, our communities. Starmer is a nut job, says Graham the joiner, working outside and dodging the showers. The flipping shower dodging is killing me. I mean, I know that 4 seasons in one day thing you talk about. I keep going out about 7 in the evening to walk the dog, and it's bright sunshine. Like the greatest sunshine, and I looked up, and the skies were like as blue as they could be, and there was like a parakeet looking at me from a bush, going, I know what you're thinking. What's the deal with the sunshine at 7 flipping o'clock in the evening? Because it's no good to me. Peed hard all day, all afternoon, 7 o'clock, let's bring on the sunshine. That is God taking the mick. It's an actual meteorological nightmare. And then to that same thing, left my house where it was raining, went up the road, 200 metres later, it wasn't raining in that place. Got out the car, it was raining. Arrived at the station, it wasn't raining. So I sympathise with Graham, the joiner, who's working outside dodging the showers, because if you are working for a living, and most of our listeners do work for a living, particularly if you've got a trade and you're out there, if you're a bricklayer, plumber, you're doing anything outside, plastering, whatever, landscape gardening, labour, all of that, it's a nightmare. You wake up, you go, do I go to work? Do I not go to work? I don't know. I might try. It's not just a bit of rain, is it? It's an absolute torrential downpour. The good news is that apparently the sun is coming out again. Is that right, Finn? In about a week's time? I think we've got the good weather, 25 degrees. Yeah, don't say it's out right now. I know it's out right now, but it might not be in 1 hour. That's the point, isn't it? When we leave here, it'll look like November. There'll be windy, there'll be leaves and rain. And then it'll be sunny again, just when I walk the flipping dog. Martin in the Wirral. Back to Belfast, Martin. What have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian. Just to say, before we start, thank you so much for keeping us all sane and everyone at Talk for the last few years.
That's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Been extremely troubling few years.
Yeah.
All of us saying, whenever you see Keir on TV and he acts as if he can't be bothered talking about anything that happens with any death and so on that we have, especially the stuff in Belfast, I feel like Labour had a meeting, or the government had a meeting in January and said, well, as long as we only have 200 illegal migrants or migrant killings, only 200 illegal migrants or migrant rapes, and only 5 mass slaughter events in the country this year, we've done well. So when we have events like this, they sort of look at it and go, what are you moaning about? Do you know what we planned for? Do you know how bad it could be?
Yeah.
You've got it really good right now. And I feel like, no, I've hit my limit years ago.
Yeah.
Absolute years ago.
That's very true.
Day. I watch, say, horror films or thrillers now. They don't scare you anymore because when you see the video that was out yesterday, it's absolutely horrific.
Do you know what? We made this point yesterday, and we weren't trying to make light of anything, but you know when they, not that long ago, they'd advertise a new horror flick, Scream 3 or something, or Amityville 10, and it would, the story would go out there, this is the scariest thing you've ever seen. Social media has clearly decided that that isn't no film is ever going to be the scariest thing we've ever seen.
No. And on another point on your stop and search, if an officer came up to me to say, a person fitting your description, we believe you had a knife or a gun, so we're going to search you, I'd go, OK. He'd search me. I don't have it, and I'd say goodbye.
Yeah.
It's that easy. It doesn't bother me because I haven't done anything wrong.
Well, right, yeah. I mean, they're over quite quickly. And apart from anything else, the old bill, they're filmed left, right and centre, including from their own chest. So you'd have to be a particularly stupid copper if you thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and racially abuse some young kid because every single moment of that conversation is going to be recorded.
Yeah, but if you are the police and you're looking for that fella, I want you to find that fella because I don't want my family anywhere near them. Anywhere near them, so find them. And if ticking me off the list means you move on to the next person, albeit no problem.
Great call. Martin, take care, mate. Thank you for that, Martin in the Wirral. A little bit of breaking news. Ben Stokes will miss England's second test against New Zealand at the Oval. Ben Stokes is apparently a cricketer. Is that right, Finn? Yeah. This follows an incident in a London nightclub with Joe Root, also a cricketer, stepping in as interim captain. Stokes and pace bowler Gus Atkinson, I'm assuming he does the same for a living, who also is omitted from the squad, broke the team's midnight curfew in the early hours of Monday morning and were present when a member of England's security staff was struck by Saracens rugby player Toto Uvar. I've got that pronunciation correctly. So this is a cricket story. For those of you that follow cricket, it's more interesting. But nonetheless, what it does feed into, I did read a little bit about this, are the rules and regs around what you do and if you let your fellow teammates down. And it appears that Stokes spectacularly did that. Who was it a couple of years ago? Was it Freddie Flintoff that went out in the Pedalo? When he was... Why is Finn saying no? It wasn't. All right, maybe it was. It might have been Flintoff. Who was out drunk in a Pedalo. I'm so sorry, Freddie. I really like Freddie Flintoff, by the way, so it might not have been. Who was it? 2007. Oh, it was Flintoff. Cricket World Cup, heavy drinking session, defeat to New Zealand. Off he went on a pedal, early hours of the morning, and was a bit tanked up, and that was not good protocol. Got in trouble. So there you go. He fell into Caribbean waters. had to be rescued by the hotel staff, apparently. All this is coming through in my ear in real time. I'm just reading it back out. So Ben Stokes follows in the footsteps in one respect. But breaking the curfew was the point, and that's what's got him in trouble. So he misses England's second test against New Zealand at the Oval. I'm told by those that follow the cricket that that is devastating for the game. That's the one, isn't it, where the bloke stands there in whites just doing hand movements and everyone goes, oh, look what he's given. No one knows what those movements mean. You know, they don't actually mean anything. And a fella on the scoreboard just rolls over a number. 4, 5, 6, doesn't really matter. There's no rules to cricket. 0344 499 1000. You know, the Ronnie Irani used to play for England and Essex. Do you know this, Finn? He used to work at TalkSport. And I said that to him one day. I said, there's no rules in cricket. It's just about how fast you throw a ball and how hard somebody hits it. And he went, do us a favour, mate. He said, grab that bin. And he gave me a waste paper bin. And I walked onto the other side of the office. And he stood on the other side with a cricket ball. And he lobbed that ball straight in the bin. I looked like a right wally after that. All right, there's a bit of skill to it. It's not exactly football, is it? Or dominoes. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Varlic Halakane was a 32-year-old black man. He murdered 3 white people. Not once in any part of the conversation or reporting was there any racial profiling or even the question raised.
I don't want to drag this boy onto the issues, not onto Henry, and that is something that the family have asked for.
35 years I've been doing this. I've never seen a moment when most of mainstream media and most of mainstream politics was more out of touch with the country than over this issue. Quite extraordinary.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's just quickly do the voice of doom. We had, of course, the mystery voice before the news at 3 o'clock. It was a brand new one. This was the voice.
I think it's a national calamity.
Some of the guesses. Lord Hailsham. No. Michael Fabricant. It does sound a bit like Fabricant, doesn't it? Let's hear it again.
I think it's a national calamity.
Even Nick Dubois, of this parish, and, of course, former Conservative MP, thought it could be Michael Fabricant. Carl Turner, no. Ed Miliband, no. Sir Julian Lewis, it is not. Peter Shaw, no. Cyril Smith, no. Nigel Lawson, no. But we did get a winner on day one. Ross in Stoke-on-Trent. Congratulations. I'm not going to say who it is. Douglas Hogg was the answer, or Lord Hogg. Gary in Lower Chapel and Paul in Tynemouth, as well as Ross, got it correct. Douglas Hogg, he was the Agriculture Minister. I'm tempted to say, was he the guy that fed his kid the burger during the mad cow? Was that him? Or was that Selwyn Gum? I don't know. It was that era, nonetheless. Douglas Hogg was the answer. It means we have a brand new Voice of Doom tomorrow. Stand by for that. I bet you can't wait. Steve's in Bristol. Steve, what was that? Steve's in... Steve's in... Have I just arrived in a parallel universe? Is this a new Netflix show and I'm part of it and don't realise? Did Charlie Brooker write this show today? I just sort of heard myself back in sped-up time. How you doing, Steve?
I'm very well, thank you, Ian. Ian, before I say anything, I want to caveat it with I don't agree with violence in any shape or form.
Fair.
I will defend myself if necessary, but I don't believe in starting something. That being said, you know, when you have something happen like you did yesterday in Northern Ireland, the Northern Irish, they're A1 when it comes to riots. They've had more years practice than anybody that I can think of.
Yeah.
This country is on its knees. We are at breaking point. We have unfettered immigration. We are taxed to the highest level we have ever been under any government, and we've got more on the way. My home bills have gone up astronomically. My business bills have gone up astronomically.
Sure.
I speak to people every day, and the silent masses have had enough. Now, if we were in France or if we were in Germany, there would be riots on the streets to what's happening in this country. The British are so laid back, but I can tell you now, it is only going to take a small spark and people have had enough. We got more taxes on the way. We got more immigration on the way. And for Starmer and his crew to say, we're dealing with it. They are born in the wool human rights lawyers. Most of the front bench are human rights lawyers. They have no intentions of smashing the gangs or stopping the immigration because they believe that these people all deserve to be here. Now, riots are coming. Civil unrest is coming. I don't think it'll be to the level that we see or have seen in Ireland, but it is coming and people are sick and tired of it. When you're a rat in a corner, you fight back. And the British person, doesn't matter what colour you are, I've got neighbours who are Sikh, I've got neighbours who have been here since the 50s and they're Turkish. They are sick and tired of it. And people are beginning to start thinking about fighting back. And you're a rat trapped in a corner. What are you going to do?
Well, I mean, this is the big fear, isn't it? And you do wonder whether everything you've just said, Steve, is already being discussed somewhere in the Home Office. So are they... I mean, naturally, there's always some... Well, you'd like to think there's always some kind of plan to deal with it. The worst thing that can happen for a government is public unrest. It is massively destructive. It means, of course, the symbolism is there for all to see. It means the government have lost control. And when that happens, that they have a bigger headache than... This channel migration stories has gone on for years is not, as you rightly say, Steve, I don't believe it is a headache for Starmer. I don't think he loses sleep over it whatsoever. But a riot, he would lose sleep over.
I don't think he would, because it would give him control. Full disclosure, I'm an ex-copper.
Right, okay.
And I've been out of the job through my own choice a lot of years now. But I still retain a lot of contacts in a number of police forces.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that they're not prepared for this. They're not prepared. Yes, they've got public order teams. Yes, they've got this. But every time you've got an incident like you had in Belfast last night, they have to call in mutual aid. Now, that takes officers from local constabularies out, and you're only going to need 3, maybe 4 cities to go up in flames. They won't cope. And the army are not prepared to come in because
we've only just about got one, Steve.
Exactly. You know, I work under the underbelly of life. I don't want to say what I do, but I deal with the underbelly of society.
Okay.
And it's getting worse out there.
Yeah.
It's getting worse. My colleagues have been in the civil sector assaulted left, right, and centre, and the police cannot and will not deal with it. So if you think that they're going to fund civil unrest, not a hope in hell.
It's a grim analysis, Steve, but something rings very true and certainly possible in what you've said. Steve, thank you. And of course, the one way politicians could get out of this is by flipping doing something that most people are crying out for. If you talk about protecting your borders, if you talk about the fact, why is a bloke from Sudan mooching around from Paris to Dublin, what is he, Judith flipping Chalmers or something, and then shows up eventually in Belfast, then there is an alleged, I have to say all these words because this is an ongoing case, but there are many others that are taken the same. How is that happen? How is that? Even if you I know I always say this, it's not about not accepting reality. I know that the average person from Sudan or Sydney that comes to this country ain't here to cause anyone any harm. We know that. We just don't know which ones are. And if you have thousands of people arrive in a country without any name, without any passport, without any papers or detail, you don't even know necessarily the country, you've only got their word for that. If that is the case, then I don't think anybody should be surprised that once in a while something is going to kick off. And even if it's not directly representative of all people, we all get that. As we said yesterday, you do not know in a boatload of 60 blokes or a boatloads of thousands over the course of a week or two, you don't know which ones are. There's no other system in the world. Every time, the story of somebody forgetting their passport, or who is it that told me something recent? I can't remember if it was at home or on air. Sometimes I get confused about the two. Of somebody whose passport they got to or did they go with a family? I think it was a school story from one of the kids. And they got there and the dad's passport was out of date, but it had 6 months left, but it needed to have 12 months and couldn't fly. So the whole family are there. They're ready to go. Everything's tickety-boo. They've gone through part of the system. And, of course, it's not the person that does your bags. They might look at your passport, but they're not making that decision. And you get to the gate or whatever it was. I can't remember which end or the full story. And they're told, sorry, you can't come in. It's like here I am. It's Mum, it's Dad. You can see you've got my flip-flops on. We're obviously going to Marbella for a couple of days. And the kids are there, they've got their sunglasses, everything's ready. It's obvious. No, you can't. It's that strict. It's that strict. You just think there would be... Maybe once upon a time they tried wiggle room and people started to take the pick. I don't know, but it's so strict. We once cancelled a holiday because one of the kids' passport didn't cancel it, couldn't go. We found out in advance, but not very much in advance, that the little one's passport had run out. So it's that strict. And yet you can pop over on a boat and you don't actually need anything. And you can have a mooch around wherever you like. By the way, in the last section when we did the Voice of Doom, and I read out all the wrong answers, I mentioned Lord Hailsham as one of the wrong answers. I've now been informed by Finn that Lord Hailsham is also Douglas Hogg. That's his other name, Lord Hailsham. This piece of misinformation is so grave, I have referred myself to Ofcom. I've actually complained about myself, and the full might of the law should come down on me. Oh, he was the MP with the moat in the expenses scandal. That was Hoggy, was it? Little snout in the trough, or the moat, as it turned out. 0344 499 1000. Now, some exciting news to share with you from our friends over there at TalkSport. I say over there, they're just in the wall behind me. With the World Cup kicking off tomorrow, TalkSport and Meantime have teamed up to create a lager. It's called So Good Lager, which will be poured from all O'Neill's pubs and some of the best sports pubs across the UK. And you can find your nearest pub by visiting talksport.com/sogood. 18 plus, please drink responsibly. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. 0344 499 1000, 25 to 4. Now, the Education Secretary is warning parents against wrapping their kids in cotton wool, saying kids need to take more risks and face the real world. This from a government presiding over more than 1 million young people who are not in work, education or training. Are the two things connected? Zoe Strimple is a historian, author, newspaper columnist and broadcaster. Zoe, nice to have you with us.
Oh, wow, I've got so many titles. Nice to be here.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to stick that on a name badge, would you? You wouldn't be able to walk through a door with that lot.
No,
But nice to have you with us. Listen, I mean, it does make sense. I mean, I don't usually find myself concurring with a Labour frontbencher, but perhaps Bridget Phillipson has got a point here when she talks about parents coddling their children because it shields them from the real world. What do you say?
I mean, yes, but I also think it's just a little bit off topic for her. I'm not sure it's as simple as, all of our, or some of our educational and work woes and all the other issues that young people are facing are going to be solved by parents just suddenly saying, take the bus to school. I suppose I think that these are, fairly complicated issues embedded in lots of things, like just general changes in trends. What you do when you have the technology to know what a child is doing every second of the day. You'd have to then tell parents to suspend their interest, even though they could technically know what the child is doing because of smartphones. Yeah. And I suppose I would say just, the other thing she talks about is the huge rollout of mental health help in school. And she connects these two things. And I actually think they're quite contradictory. I think there's kind of endless, relentless emphasis on mental health and getting children to constantly think about how they're feeling is exactly going in the opposite direction to making them self-sufficient.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also think that all the things that must be on the Secretary of State for Education's agenda, the to-do list, must be fairly lengthy over there at that department. The school bus question, I'm surprised, made it into the top 50, but somehow it has, and it started this debate. You're right about, the mental health thing and feelings and how you are, etc., seems to be, we see this in the workplace as well. well. I've only really just correlated it more of late, that it's not something just in the workplace where people or bosses are more worried about your feelings than they are about your ability to do the job they've literally paid you to do. And yet we're doing it in school all the time. And whilst it's, you know, it's positive if there's a kid who's struggling, obviously teachers are there to spot that. But we do seem to have almost defined an entire generation by this.
Right. And we've also rolled out what schools are meant to do to an impossible degree. I mean,
True.
schools are meant to be well-being centers, therapy centers, so, you know, keeping an eye out for obviously things requiring social services like education, race training. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. And if you want children to start being self-sufficient, taking risks and being interested in the world and feeling confident, you should let school just become school again, which, you know, most kids when I was growing up hated school, and it was probably for the good. Yeah. And they got on with their lives outside of school. And that's where the kind of the independence is fostered. I mean, there's a fantastic book by the American journalist Abigail Shrier, which is called Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up or something like that. And it's about the really negative effects on children's development and mental health of the therapy culture, basically, and how, you know, this intense focus does more harm than good. Yes, as you say, for children that are struggling, it's good. But then you think, well, what can the school do? I mean, provide them with a lifelong of therapeutic support? No, schools can't possibly do that. So, you know, it's all wrapped up in this bigger cultural issue. And, you know, the other thing I thought looking at this was, well, okay, so say they're coddled as children. Is that so bad? I mean, they've got the rest of their lives to be uncoddled. As for the workplace stuff, that's just fear of being sued. I mean, this is all out of fear. We're afraid of litigation. We're afraid of another Me Too moment.
It's a really good point, because I've got a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old. Don't try coddling the 12-year-old, because he wants nothing to do with that. You know, he's going to be a teenager next year, and the last thing he needs is certainly in front of any mates. My 7-year-old, I'm sort of slightly hanging on to the coddling because it's lovely, and they've still got a babyishness about them. They're not going to be like, I won't be doing that when he's 47, for goodness sake. I mean, you know, enjoy it.
Well, and not only that, but you always, you know, you hear of kids perfectly, you know, a lot of kids are still going on gap years or going off working in Thailand or Burma, or maybe not Burma, but, you know, places like that. So I don't think that, I mean, it's just bizarre. The whole thing just seems like, no, more mental health stuff isn't the answer to a generation that's completely got nothing else but to say, oh, my mental health. And that's what they use to get out of work, to shut down conversation, to tell their parents to get lost, to be rude, to behave badly. It's actually, in a way, if I were to say you want to improve the outcomes for young people today, I'd say really tamp down on all that. It's not even the smartphones. So yeah, in terms of the coddling, I mean, the ban for under 16 social media, that seems like a coddle to me. So yeah, there's a lot of contradictions, I suppose, in what she's saying.
What's interesting as well is that the stuff she's talking about is pretty basic, I think, for most parents. Naturally, I mean, there will be some who continually sort of infantilize their children, no matter what age they are. Obviously, they'll always be your kids, so you'll always have them. You'll perceive them in a different way to other people might, but you know, I think most parents, I mean, my kid goes to school on a bus. It's a half-hour journey. If I'm brutally honest, I don't know, Zoe, whether I should feel guilty about this, but I didn't really think twice about it. It was the only way he could get to school. So there was never, ever going to be a debate about it. It's helped by he's got a couple of mates on the same bus. But, yeah, I mean, it's great. And when I do get tales from the bus, I quite enjoy them.
And have a little trust in your children. I mean, even very young children, they're not stupid. They're aware. They can be amazingly aware of what's going on. They can be very kind of physically savvy about danger. I don't know. I mean, obviously, you want to protect them, and that's natural and right. But I think that you can create the children you want, and you can also create the children you don't want. So if you tell them they're too stupid and too irresponsible to handle anything, then you're not gonna get a good outcome, are you?
It's a good point.
You know.
Yeah. Listen, Zoe, great to have you on with us. Thank you for your time. Zoe Strimple, historian, author, newspaper columnist and broadcaster. A big list there. Thank you to her. It's all kind of common sense stuff. It's always intriguing, and I'm sure when you were a kid it was intriguing. Things that you were allowed to do that other kids weren't, or vice versa. Because you always tell your parents, oh, please, can I stay out till 9 o'clock? Because Matthew's staying out till 9. And then, obviously, you know, a phone call happens between parents. And you realise, no, Matthew's got to be in at 7. You just made that stuff up. I do remember when I was a kid, Grange Hill, which I don't know when Grange Hill came off TV. Finn, you're 24. Do you remember Grange Hill? You've heard it. You've heard of it. It wasn't in your era, right? But it went on for years after my era. I know that much. Grange Hill, there were a couple of kids at school who weren't allowed to watch Grange Hill, and I found this really strange. I don't know where their parents got it, because there was nothing particularly... I mean, it dealt with a few... there was the famous Zammo and the drugs thing, but that was more of a sort of... like an education. There was some bullying in it, and of course, but there was a message. Phil Redmond, who devised Grange Hill brilliantly, you know, put some of that key stuff in there so that kids would maybe learn a little bit from it. But it was mostly boys watched it to see which other girls their age they fancied on Grange Hill, and girls, I'm sure, watched it for the same reason. Tucker Jenkins was a pin-up character back then, right? And he went on to be in EastEnders. So there was a lot of that, but there were kids who were not allowed to watch it. And I used to think, that's really weird. What time kids go to bed, there's another controversy. And, of course, now kids have iPads and things and phones. And, yes, you have a responsibility as a parent that you make sure that they're not in their bedroom or allowed to play with them at certain times. So material they see, and we were talking about this yesterday with material you see online, you know, unfortunately... kids can see that stuff, even if they're not on Twitter. You know, it doesn't take anything for another kid in the class. I'm talking year 7s here. So these are, you know, 11-year-olds who's, you know, one kid in the school got hold of that video. The Charlie Kirk thing did the rounds. Now this one will be doing the rounds. That's easy to show that to another kid or share it with another kid. You don't have to be on YouTube. You don't have to be on Twitter or Instagram. It just gets shared around. That bit is a sad reality of our times, because we have, you know, this is stuff that you would never have shown anywhere at any time. You'd only found it on the dark web. Now it could be on your 11-year-old's phone. And don't anyone tell me that's not a game changer. Coddling. MJ is in Staffordshire. MJ, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Yeah, I'd just like to say good afternoon, Ian. Hope you're well.
Yeah, all good, thanks. Yeah, far away.
I'd just like to say that I think the big difference between our sort of generation and the generation today is most of us knew the difference between reality and fiction.
Yeah.
So you knew that you would not go around copying like Imelda or whatever her name was in Grange Hill or whoever else was in there. You just wouldn't do it. You know, in actual fact, we learned a lot about drugs and things through watching Grange Hill and Damo's difficulties and all that sort of stuff, you know, which we weren't really taught much about at school, actually. I've learned much more as an adult about, you know, classifications of drugs and things like which I would never have known when I was younger. I think youngsters today are perhaps a bit more in tune with all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the best will in the world, I think the worst thing you can do actually is have conversations with other parents. Because I think you think you've all got, you know, common ground, you've all got children of the same age or similar age or whatever, but people have very different ideas of parenting. And I think sometimes you just got to say to perhaps your own children, whoever, look, this is what we do. What they do is their business, up to their mums and dads, but this is what we do. You know, because I think, you know, it's very easy to fall into this trap of, oh, such and such as mum says this, such and such as a person's dad calls him mate or whatever. Well, you know, we don't use that sort of language. You're a child, you're not my mate, you're a child until you're 18 or whatever.
That's a good point, yeah.
And, you know, and I do think sometimes, yeah, I mean, it starts from a young age. It can start with reading books, it can start with anything. I think the trick is, if you're at the school gates, drop the children off just before the bell goes, and you don't linger around, and you don't get engaged in these conversations, and then you do work out who the people are who you do want to talk to and the people you do trust, and sometimes it might be none of them. And I think the problem with politicians today, when they try to make these ridiculous comments about children should be taking more risks and this, that and the other, I'm sorry, but they're not the parents of Jane the Bulger. They're not the parents of the people who've been stabbed, who we've listened to, interviewed on your fantastic show. You know, they're not living in Belfast where that person's turned up and decided to try and behead somebody. And they probably don't travel on buses either where they come across cannabis smokers and violent people and fights which break out on buses. And until they've experienced life in those areas, I think they should just keep the comments to themselves.
It's a fair point. And do you know what? Even if, because the statistics say that there's there's no greater chance of your child being snatched off the street than there was 50 years ago. But the perception is very different. I think that's not quite true. Well, it might be truth in the sense of somebody literally taking your child. But there are other dangers that are out there for kids today. But even the perception is the reality, right, for parents.
Yeah, and I think statistics, again, are very vague. I mean, you've only got to look at statistics such as employment statistics, for example. You know, are we taking into account students and people like that? People leave jobs and start jobs all the time. You know what I mean? With so many factors we're not taking into account, there are probably many more people working part-time than full-time. So, you know, it makes the statistics look better than what they actually are. Perhaps not many people are working many hours. And it's the same with anything. I think you can film the statistics, you can manipulate them to suit whatever you want them to suit. And I think when they produce, politicians and whoever produce these statistics on air, they don't tell you how they've, you know, come across these statistics and who they've interviewed or specific percentages or anything like that. They could be telling you anything.
It's a great call. MJ, thank you. I hear you as well. MJ in Staffordshire. Parents have different experiences. And that's true. And perception does become a reality. Even, you know, whatever the stats might say, you know, we live in a world where we are surrounded by, you know, pretty horrific stuff. We see it online. We hear stories. Some of them might be made up, but we hear them nonetheless. It kind of feeds into that sort of slightly destabilised, helpless feel as a parent. Alison in Billericay says, my step-grandma said she would never have let her kids watch Grange Hill because they were all too common. Yeah, I think some people saw it a bit like that. Graham says, Faye Lucas and Trisha were the two girls I really fancied on Grange Hill. I wrote to one of them at the BBC. Do you know, it's just reminded me of a story. I went to a wedding about 10 years ago, and I was sitting next to this woman at a wedding, and I thought, she looks familiar. And somebody said to me, she didn't say it, somebody else said to me, you know, she was Jackie in Grange Hill. And I went, are you kidding me? And then as soon as he said it, it's like, she looked just the same. She had the same haircut. And I think her name is Melissa Wilkes, the actress Melissa Wilkes. She was at this. I was bowled over by this because I thought she was perhaps a future Mrs. Collins at one point. So people watch Grange Hill for different reasons, and some parents had very, very, very strict views on Grange Hill as it was. I mean, it's hilarious now when you look at what kids see online and the adventures of Zamo, Tucker Jenkins, Roland, that kid, and others seem to be potentially offensive to the all-round development of our children. Strange changing times. Now, the FIFA World Cup kicks off tomorrow, and our friends at talkSPORT are sending you and a mate straight to New York City with Adidas, the tournament's official match ball supplier. It's the ultimate trip to watch England facing Panama live at the MetLife Stadium. This is going to be huge. You get return flights, hotel, match tickets, spending money, all taken care of, plus Adidas are throwing in the official Trionda match ball and a fresh pair of boots. So don't miss out. This is how you enter.
For your chance to win, head to our friends at talksportwin.com or text TALK to 83338. Text costs £2.50 plus your standard network rate, or call 0343 418 7260. Lines close on the 12th of June 2026 at 4 p.m. That's when you'll need to answer your phone if it rings. 18 plus UK residents only. This is a network promotion. Full T's and C's at talksportwin.com. So for your chance to win, text TALK to 83338 now.
Valdo Calacane was a 32-year-old black man. He murdered 3 white people. Not once in any part of the conversation or reporting was there any racial profiling or even the question raised.
I don't want to drag this boy onto the issues, not onto Henry, and that is something that the family have asked for.
35 years I've been doing this. I've never seen a moment when most of mainstream media and most of mainstream politics was more out of touch with the country than over this issue. Quite extraordinary.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. A mate of mine, Steve, I've just remembered this, has said that Zamo in Grange Hill has his own key-cutting business. And I did know that, actually, Steve. I was aware of that, but I bumped into you. At one point, he lived in East London, and I bumped into him. Lee McDonald, that's his name. And he played Zamo, which was a great character. And Lee McDonald, who I bumped into, but since I've bumped into a few times here and there. He stayed sane, I'd imagine, mostly. Todd Carty, who played Tucker, became Mark Fowler in EastEnders. Pauline's son, which they then changed the character, got somebody else. So a few of them did go on and do other stuff. And Susan Tully, who played, name escapes me, in Grange Hill, she is, or I don't know if she still is, but was a director for EastEnders and stuff. So she went into the kind of directing side of it. It's a tricky old business, though, isn't it, being a child star? That's a road that is fraught with either goes that way or it goes that way. And you can see why some people get mucked up when you've been thrust into the spotlight, having a bit of a party in your teenage years. It sounds great. And then you get to 18 and go, where's the work? Where's the money? You never got paid that much anyway. Ralph is in Banbury. Back to the events in Belfast last night, if that is the right way to describe it. Probably not, Ralph, but you know what I'm saying. What have you got for us?
Hi, Ian. Look, first time caller with you. I just want to say quickly that, you guys at TalkSport are full of common sense and you are a voice of reason. Look, regards the current tensions in the country, couple of things, in my opinion. The whole the way that Labour is, or this government is running this country, is based on political ends, and it's really about developing voting groups, in my opinion. I think it's the only thing that correlates with everything that makes sense. All the policies are about, at the end of the day, division and ensuring some type of vote.
Because you don't sense, do you, with this government, you don't sort of sense, these guys, I might not have voted for them, but they've got me back, they know what they're doing, and they've got a great route plan, and they're going to make the country better. I don't know anyone who has that feeling or analysis over this government.
No, absolutely. It's totally nonsensical. Yeah. The only thing which, in my opinion, that binds it together is the desire to catch a voting pool. So basically, I actually think, I know it's a strong word, but it's borderline treasonous. They're putting their party political aims over above what is good for the population, and that is, I think, really apparent, clear, and I think we should start to maintain the discourse or develop the discourse more on this line.
Well, listen, it's a great point. Ralph, I've got to step in because we've literally hit the end of the show. But you make a good point, and I think, actually, that journey of doom for Starmer is well underway. It's only really a matter of time. For Labour, as a party, well, we might have to wait a couple of years, but we will see. Kevin O'Sullivan's on the other side of the news. What's going on, Kev? Afternoon.
Hello, Ian. Yes. It's this... Look, you have to go through this process. I'm getting a bit sick of it, but of course we don't condone the